but whatever. As long as
That's
that
okay,
sounds
it's
good to
fixed now.
you.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the stream. So
Did
anyways,
you push
to the point
record
then,
as well? Did you push
yeah.
record?
So to the
Okay.
point, mirrors, the mirror of the law, right? Mirrors are doors. This is why historically people were afraid of mirrors, and you don't have mirrors, right? This is why the wealthy do, because mirrors are a comparison point. They're actually reflective of time. That's why they're a law. A mirror of the law is time is death, death is time. Comparison, it compresses time. This is the whole Snow White, the Queen versus Snow White thing. And
Right.
so mirrors are very dangerous because they're doors. So when someone says to you, okay, you seem to have you seem to have your life together, and it convicts me. It's like, well, because God holds me up as a mirror to you. But even deeper symbolically is I'm a door through which heaven is open to you. And so what you're really seeing is a person who's walking the liminal edge between heaven and earth. This is what holiness is. I talked about this in my sermon for Sunday, right?
Well, it's
Is
the
that
way,
holiness
right?
is-
And the truth
Yeah.
and the life, all
Right,
embodied
exactly.
in a person.
So
yeah.
exactly. So if God's word is embodied in you, that is that you are holy, you're in but not of, you're a door. And the door not only opens, but again, as Jesus says, I'm the door, but I'm also the one who knocks. So the mirror of the law, the door of the law is heaven is knocking on that other person's door saying, why won't you come out and play in what's good, beautiful, and true? Why won't you participate in what's holy and real? And they're saying, I don't want to. So then they come around and say, how come every time I'm around you, I feel judged, I feel convicted, I feel inspired? It's because I'm the door now. I'm the embodiment. I've been embodied by God. And like Shaw said this morning is like, can you willingly choose to receive what was given to you freely by grace? And the answer is, of course you can't. So I can no more choose to embody Christ than I can choose whether or not that you be convicted by me. All I can do is follow where my shepherd leads me.
Right.
And in that following, I'm holy. And in that holiness, I'm a door and I'm a mirror. And when that opens to you and you're not going to participate in this reality that I'm, again, humbly participating in, prayerfully participating in, repentingly, it is going to shine the mirror and say, who is the fairest of them all? And the answer from God's side of the house, from heaven, is not you. That's the problem, is that you see your ugliness. What they don't know yet, because again, this is the wilding part, is that when God embodies you, you don't feel holier, you actually feel less holy. And so their conviction is going to lead to them, it's going to lead them to, quote unquote, a worse place than they already are. Because they think, well, if I'm holy, then I don't have these problems. Like, actually, the light exposes even more. This is why the queen does what she does before she goes and tempts Snow White. It's like, that's reality, though. I must decrease that you may increase.
We were talking before we went live that, it struck me that Romans 13, everybody talks about civil authority and how difficult it is to obey civil authority.
Right.
But it says authorities, and it never, and until it has pay taxes to Caesar, it's not really, there's nothing notable about it being civil authority except for it being personified. Talking about you want to be free, but this line, listen to this line.
Yeah.
Do you want to be free from fear of the one who is in authority? And I don't think people actually want to live a life free of fear.
No.
They
King's North says this in one of the lectures I shared, which is this. Nietzsche said it, King's North summarizes it, that when we get rid of God, it doesn't mean a world without God. What it means is that we will worship the most powerful thing on earth, whatever that is, because that's what God is to us. God in a
fearful worship you're talking about. Fearful.
Exactly. Well, just power. Like we worship power. I keep saying this, right? Is that the Bible lays out a pretty steady pattern of human behavior, which is we want to be enslaved. We want to. And every time we're given our freedom, we run back to the slave pits, right? And so we get rid of God as we understand him because we don't like it, because we don't like the fear. We don't like the ambiguity and the confusion and the questions of meaning. We don't like the truth. So then we just choose the most powerful bully on the block to be our God, right? And then it turns out that bully doesn't actually care all that much about us. And now we've gone from bad to worse. And so then you run back to the God that you're, the big G God that you're afraid of, or do you just find another alternative?
It's this weird paradoxical relationship because you're like, I want to be under the bully, but I also want to constantly live in rebellion to the bully.
Correct.
To see how far I can push the bully.
Well,
and get
no,
away
because
with
you
it.
have to be a victim. Being a victim, being pitiful.
So you make
Jesus'
yourself the
words.
victim and to be pitiful. Okay.
And then Jesus becomes appealing to the victim class because then they erect him as the ultimate victim. He's the ultimate pitiful character in history because he is the victim of all victims. And therefore, my victimness, my victimhood makes me holy in a secular sense or in a religious sense. Again,
And he's
Kingsnorth is
and
right.
he's a willing victim. I mean, that's
Yes.
part of the complex.
This is why every movie, the Mary Sue hero archetype, every movie has to reestablish the patriarchy so that there's something to victimize the hero so that she can tear down the patriarchy to be the hero. But if there's no patriarchy, then there's no victimhood. And if there's no victimhood, there's no hero story. So you're just re-erecting the thing that you already tore down over and over and over
Yeah,
again.
sure.
Which is why everyone's tired of it. For a moment, the original explosion, the initial explosion is provocative because everyone's going, what was that? But after 4 or 5 explosions, you go, it's just the same thing all the time. It's just,
This is the story of every post-apocalyptic, civilization.
Right.
Is it always moves towards order through
Right.
tyranny? I mean, it's like, well,
Right.
wait a minute, why do we keep telling that story? Because
well,
that's
we've
what we
seen
want.
this in our own tradition, is that if you start with Luther and then go to his students, by the 1600s, we've already moved deep into a rejection of justification by faith alone. We've moved backwards.
Not in explicitly, but in practice.
Sometimes.
I probably have to say it.
But in
You think
practice,
so?
for sure. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, in
Sometimes
practice, for sure.
explicitly, because we're gonna rebaptize Reformed theology. That's pretty explicit rejection.
Or move in the other direction with like canon, coming up with
Yeah,
regional
right.
canon law.
Dogmatics. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No,
Not
it's
necessarily
always that
dogmatics.
case.
I'm just talking about like church orders.
Yeah. Yeah.
Luther
But it's
didn't
always
seem
been that
to
way.
have a church order. He had orders for the mass, I
Yeah.
suppose, but
Well, he didn't
or
need to.
baptism or something.
But this
Yeah.
is something that we should be learning because then when I do things, I have to say, okay, I'm doing these things, but how can I establish this as something that's, and the answer is you can as long as you're there. But at a certain point, the charismatic reformer,
But we all
is gonna
want to
die.
be permanent, don't we? Or eternal.
of course.
One way or the other.
And so even in that, if I was ruminating on this morning, that Jesus was tempted like us in every way, but without sin. And I thought, well, then he knew exactly what it feels like to consider the fact that when you die, most people won't even notice and very few will care. And after all that you've sacrificed and all that you've done, most people don't care. Even his own disciples just go like, oh, okay, guess we're going home. And you go like, oh, so you do feel my pain. Like you do feel that experience. And so what do you do with that? And the answer is, well, I could just give it to Christ and pray, like take it away
Yeah.
from me, right? As a temptation. Or I could use that to become a victim and perpetuate this story that I've constructed for myself. My truth. This is the purpose, is like, I will subscribe to this power and I will worship it religiously. But simultaneously, my truth is connected to that power. Again, like I said, it's not even parasitic. It's you're the familiar to the vampire. You let the vampire feed off you. The parasite actually feeds off of you, and you actually allow it because it keeps promising you, if you just follow me long enough, I'll turn you into a vampire. I'll make you the monster, which is politics in a nutshell, right?
Well, but I mean,
I just saw a picture of
the
Nancy
thing-
Pelosi with John F. Kennedy this morning.
That she's been around a while. But this is the story of Israel, in Exodus. It's like they're always looking back to Egypt. Why? Because
of
Egypt was consistent. It was predictable. Yes, it was tyrannical and it was terrible, but it was also like they knew what tomorrow was going to be like.
Yeah.
Well, they knew what to expect day to day. They knew
Right.
Pharaoh did what Pharaoh does, and we know who Pharaoh is, right?
Why do we
he didn't
wallow
really
in our
change.
own shit? Because it's safe and comfortable. It's warm and comfortable.
It smells
what
a
it
bit,
is.
but oh well.
Yeah,
Right.
but it's my stink. That's the point. It's my
So that's
stink.
what you're talking about with the wilding and the
Yeah.
and then, like I said, to live free of fear of the one in authority is actually to follow Jesus ultimately.
I would even argue at this point, the more you try to establish quote unquote order, the worse it's going to be for you in your relationship to Christ, because again, every time he comes into the center of something, they drive him back outside the walls.
Yeah.
So look at church and the way that we run church in the United States. It's domesticated, it's tame, it's predictable, often in a not godly way. We could talk liturgically about that later. It's not unity and multiplicity like a forest is a unity and multiplicity. Or like
What do you
a
mean,
family.
like predictably in debt? But anyway.
Predictably in debt, predictably staid, predictably boring, predictably,
Yeah,
predictable.
hostile to change.
Monotonous.
Hostile to...
Yes, hostile.
monotonous.
So everything that we do traditionally in the 20th century in American evangelical church life, and I go from Roman Catholics all the way down to the non-denoms, kind of just a general American religion, is actually antithetical to the wilding that God brings when he comes.
It's domestication.
Because, again,
It's domestication.
go back to Exodus, right?
Yeah.
God comes into the center of the world at that time. He comes into Egypt. He comes right to the throne of Pharaoh, the center of the universe, and says, either let him go or I'm going to uncreate creation, which is what the plagues are, right? He starts with water and the earth, and he goes through the animals and all the way up to man. It's an uncreating yet again, right? And he's like, I'm going to uncreate all of you. Then I'm going to take Israel, I'm going to throw them out into Genesis 1, verse 1. I'm going to throw them out into the void of the wilderness and lead them through the wilderness, and I'm going to feed them, and I'm going to promise them milk and honey, and I'm going to give them water, and I'm going to shelter them and protect them. They don't need the other 6 days of creation. I got this. But they have the tent of meeting, which is, again, the seventh day. Where does God rest? He rests in his temple. So they have the tent. They have the seventh day. So in the midst of chaos, they have that, their anchor, right?
Yeah.
And so when they get to the promised land, the first thing they say is, there's giants. We got to get out of here. We'd rather live in the chaos of the wilderness than go into this new wild place, right?
Well,
of
giants,
again,
demons,
witch gods, and
witches. Yes.
right.
All
And God
sorts of
says,
things.
"Don't worry, I'll tame it all for you." And he does, despite what they do. He tames it all. This is what Judges is, right? Like Judges appeals to people like us because it is just a popcorn popper without a lid, right? It's just chaos. Just every chapter is, they did whatever was right in their own hearts. And even the judges themselves, you're like, these people are amazing. I would love to know them personally. Whereas other people, like the book of Judges, is a nightmare scenario for me. There's no order, there's no law, there's no king. Everyone's doing whatever they want. The judges seem completely off. And this is the complaint. The judges do whatever they feel like. They do whatever they want. We don't like it. We want a king because we want to establish order. So then, again, bringing it forward, Jesus shows up, and as soon as he's born, he's driven out of the center, right? He's driven into Egypt. He comes back. He's driven out. He's driven out. He's driven out. Everyone he converts is always at the margins. And every time he comes to the center, they drive him back outside the walls. Again, skin, clothing. And then we have taken that entire thing. The Reformation was the rewilding of the church. Everyone blames Luther for fracturing the church. It's like, well, maybe God was winnowing the church. Have you thought about that? And now we're exactly where Luther was at when he was growing up. We're right back in the late medieval church again. The only difference being is we have a kind of pre-Christian society that we now live in, because I know most people I know that are Gen Z, they don't even know the Lord's Prayer. They're not even familiar with that. So we're in this
just basic Bible story. I mean, any
and
of the
not
narrative.
only that,
Like
basic paganism they don't even know. Like they don't even know basic paganism because they don't read.
like sacrifice or something.
Sacrifice, yeah, but like even the gods, like even the tenets, like ritual, sacrifice.
I thought I'd see
all that
more of
stuff.
those in the young people, but they didn't read like Rick Riordan, Percy Jackson and those, like, because they don't read. Because if they had read, at least they would have some awareness of like those primal archetype, in that mythology that we could work with that, you know, and say, okay, here's war and here's, these are the things that you experience in life. And
Hey, to Bonnie's point, I fired the altar guild. I am the altar guild. That took care of the problem.
Well, I
And
kind
now
of
I have a
reject
new altar guild of Gen Xers who just came up and said, "Hey, can I help?" And I was like, "You can take care of this if you want." And they're like, "I'll take care of it." And I've never talked to them again. And Gen X women are the best because FO or FAFO, that's all I'll say about Gen X women in church. Mess around and find out. They're also my martial arts classes too, so that helps. Yeah. I like these warrior priestesses.
This is I was going to say, you've got your little legion of women there.
Yeah. But no, I think what the problem is we are, again, not focused on what's good, beautiful, and true. And we think what's good, beautiful, and true is what we've been conditioned to look at as good, beautiful, and true, which are all civil, cultural, definitions. And to your point, Rome doesn't exist as a secular state. it's a theological state. The emperor is still God. They still have gods. They have temples everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Greece is a theological state. And so for us as modernists to take a materialist approach to Romans 12 is ridiculous. It's so absurdly naive and ignorant.
There's nothing like it until the 18th century, really.
Correct.
Anywhere in the world.
Like Rome didn't, like when the Trojans came up the hill, they didn't say, let's establish a city without any gods or religion. That would have been anathema to them.
Right.
This
I think that's where
early medieval missionaries are so.
What's his name? Kingsworth, whatever it is.
Yeah,
King something.
Kingsnorth. Yeah.
Yeah, and we've ragged against the Enlightenment quite a bit, but I don't think we've necessarily articulated exactly why, right? But it's that point is that whatever, I mean, all governments thought of themselves as serving gods before, or God, true God, false gods, doesn't matter, God.
Doesn't matter. They were religious. Right.
They're under authority, like the centurion says to Jesus, right? I'm a man under authority too, just like you. And you're like, wait a minute. He recognizes Jesus' authority, but he also confesses he's under Caesar, right? I mean, that's part of it.
Even the Chinese quote-unquote Communist Party at present sees itself as a religious institution. They like Xi Jinping purposefully and explicitly in print said, I'm going to bring back old China, which included Confucianism, which included ritual, the religious worship of the emperor. They brought it all back. And so, of course, they laugh at us in the West for getting rid of these things because they know it's impossible.
You can only be like a godless communist for so long before it snaps on you, right? And that's
exactly.
like, this isn't working. Let's go back to the old way. Okay,
we should adapt.
We'll just take up instead
Jared's
of having.
I'm actually we're buying new carpet. We're getting new carpet in the church.
Are you really? Because that carpet isn't great.
My painting inspired people to renovate the church, so it's been great.
Are you going to do wood in the chancel, or vinyl or something?
I've talked about pine. It's on the table.
I mean, I was presented this
way. I've shown my trustee's a framer, and I showed him stave churches. Mm-hmm. And so he's like, we can do this. I'm like, yes, that's what I wanted to hear.
Okay.
But yes, I do. I desperately want pine.
I understand having carpet.
We're also
where the shuffling feet go,
Right now in chapel, we're in temple. We're in the temple. Solomon's building of the temple.
Sure.
So we just got through all the wood. And I was salivating under the table.
Well, think about how much wood's even in the tabernacle. You're like, wait, what?
So much.
How did you guys haul all this stuff around? Well, there were a million people. Okay.
We milled it. Yeah. And then carried it by
hand. The carving.
Yeah.
The wood carving. That's got to be great. We lost that. I'd love to see that.
Yeah.
That kind of wood carving. Beautiful stuff.
But no, we're doing all kinds of stuff now. Because again, the Pajot stuff inspired the people in Bible class who then carried it out and gave me permission to start painting. The painting inspired people in church to start looking at this question of beauty and inspiration. And so now I'm proposing things like, we need to do this. Like, I'm going to have a muralist come in and paint our basement for the Sunday school. We're going to have the garden on one wall and the resurrection on another wall.
You have somebody in mind already? You found somebody?
I have a friend who's an artist that I'm going to talk to him about it. And because a muralist isn't going to charge me $10,000 to paint the walls. And I want it to be something that is practical, because if it gets wrecked, which it will, I'm not going to be like, we spent $10,000 on this wall, don't touch it.
Yeah.
Versus like, I had a muralist come in, I paid him $1,000 or $2,000 to do this. It's beautiful. It's awesome. The kids are inspired by it. But that's my point. It's like 5 years ago, that would have never happened. That conversation would have been dead on the vine. Whereas now they're like, we're going to replace the carpet. We're going to put in drop ceilings. We're going to replace the front step.
I think some of that's just generational, isn't it? I mean,
absolutely. Well,
like you said, things kind of snap back. They come around.
Yeah. Well, I had to, like I said, I thought the boomers were going to be the biggest pushback against like the new cross, the new crucifix, and my whole switch towards storytelling and symbolism. They've been actually my biggest supporters. It's like they've been waiting their whole life to hear this. And now they're like, we'll just take all of that. Just give us all of it. I'm like, really? They're like, we'll drink it up. Just fill the glass. I'm like, this is fantastic. Gen X is just like, I grew up with this stuff. They're great. And millennials are like, I've never heard this before. I'm like, great. Again, you saw my sermon last week. It was like half of it was on Aslan. People are like, that was amazing. Like, because like we talked about, and apparently I'm writing an article on this now, is the story must serve the proclamation. It can't be vice versa. But then the proclamation also has to incorporate the story equally. And then you have something that is on the left-hand kingdom side of things inspiring, because
you don't want to miss that the boomers, I mean, this is what I grew up with, boomer pastors that they always preach stories, but they weren't relevant.
Yeah. No, they're just
they were stories. They were just bad stories, right? They weren't relevant
to do
stories.
with the gospel? Yeah.
Exactly.
Like,
Exactly.
what does this story have to do with the gospel lesson? Well, Jesus. You're like,
Because I've had people say, well, thanks for that,
maybe?
Anecdote or whatever, that little bit, not necessarily a full story, just,
right.
I hadn't really thought about that. I'm like, okay. But I can't, especially personal anecdotes. I generally only do it with the dead or the dying,
Yeah.
Because they can't
Well,
really
here's
push
a
back on
question.
it.
Kind of Jared inspired this. Is there going to be a point where we repent architecturally? Not just as
I think we
just
already
a
are.
church.
We already are. Yeah. You saw this with, I hate to mention by name, but Trump, he was into this with federal buildings. It's like he recognized these gross, ugly ones. They don't convey the dignity of rule. Now, whether or not you agree that the FBI needs to have that kind of dignity associated with it in its building, that's not the point. His point was, he's like, no, we need the neo-Gothic or whatever architecture. I don't remember what kind of Romanesque or whatever. Like just something that conveys permanence and dignity and authority and all of this. We recognize that architecture did that. Of course, then he was out of office, so it didn't matter. But I think Jared, to Jared's point, I've seen some many churches where they polish the floors. They've done a really nice job with that, with concrete, where you can polish and you can do the, it's like they do the garage ceiling, but you can, you can make it pretty high gloss or textured. I mean,
or you could paint it and then gloss it.
I don't like the painted floors. I
mean like a mural. Like you could paint murals on the floor.
Oh, you could do patterns like it's terrazzo or something. You know, kind of mock terrazzo.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
And then gloss over it and put a finish on it. I've also
nice.
batted that idea around. No, my
That would be
favorite thing,
beautiful.
I get I don't know, it's like a twisted part of me a large part of me is twisted, but is like when you see an ancient building and then they add on to it with modern architecture. So it's like jutting out of the old building because it's
You
just
could look
that
across,
radical,
just look across the street here.
Yeah, that radical juxtaposition of beauty and just absolute hideousness. And you're like, it's like a demon is actually like crawling out of like, like
It just looks like an abscess. On
an abscess, exactly. Yeah, it's like an ugly butterfly crawling out of a chrysalis. You're like, what happened? This didn't gestate long enough.
I mean, at least they use the same stone or the same brick, but the architectural, it doesn't match. It's not the same style.
Yeah.
You're like, well, why did you do that? Because it's clearly doesn't belong there now.
I think
it was cheap.
My
it was
hope,
cheap.
one of my hope is that Christians recognize now how much we've been assumed into modernity in our decision making, so that you can step back and go, okay, well, this is my church now. My church is ugly. It's architecturally, it's aesthetically ugly. It's not inspiring, but I can't do anything about it. The foundation's laid, unless we're going to bulldoze the building and spend $500 million building a new.
I've seen some pretty incredible renovations of just basically a steel.
That's my point.
Building.
That's what I said to my council president Wednesday. I said, we're going to start small. We're going to make little changes. And after a year or two or three, those little changes will add up to something that when you walk in, you'll be like, something happened here.
I think the harder part is to try to, and they did this in my first congregation, the first call, is that they added a steeple, and it looked like an add-on. It's like, so you can beautify the inside pretty easily even with a box. Where you can have that otherworldly sense, like I'm going, into the heavens. The exterior is probably a little bit harder, I think.
Right.
To make it not look of the world.
I don't think you can get around that. And in a way, I actually like that because it welcomes you into a mystery. That when you walk in, all of a sudden you're enveloped by like, well, from the outside, this looks like a plain white Protestant church. But then I came in and poof, So I like
now
that
there's
sense
candles and there's wrought iron and there's
right.
there's gold and there's painting and like what happened?
Yes,
Where did this
exactly.
come from?
And because I've been places, and you have too, like you go to some city and you're downtown, for example, and just the sprawl and the skyscrapers, and it's just, concrete and steel and noise. And you walk into the building and all of a sudden you're immediately just like enveloped in comfort and peace because the inside is completely contrary to what's happening outside of it. I like that because it gives that sense of, kind of like a TARDIS feel to it, like Doctor Who, where you're like, but then
it's bigger on the inside.
Yeah.
Yeah. Although, I do think like when you go down into, go downtown in the city and there's all these, metal or steel and glass, and then there's, a brick and wood, church that's stuck in the middle of all that. That's in its own way, that's a call, right? It's like
that scene in Up at the beginning, right? Where the house is there and then they build the city around the house. There's something to that. Yeah. Symbolically or something to it.
It's attractive in its own way. Then it's like this, What is this?
Right.
Why is this here? Let me go explore that. Right. See what that's about.
That's why I said to you, and I think I might have brought it up on the show, can't remember, is that after Pentecost, I'm going to preach kind of like what I did during Advent, where I'm going to preach on the symbolism of the liturgy. Because again, you can say it. The liturgy is a confession of reality. It's actually a depiction of reality. If you hate liturgy, you're going to hate heaven. But again, I think you have to give people more traction with the like, this is what this is. This is what's happening. This is where this is coming from biblically. Here's the biblical narrative about it. Because like we were just talking about is, you can talk about Solomon building the temple, right? Or you could just describe it in language people can understand. And then
or the tabernacle is the same way. This is just like, this is beyond my comprehension. I'm like, no, it's not actually. You could imagine this.
Yes.
Just like my open up your mind a bit here.
My 12-year-old goes, they painted the whole thing gold? I said, no, they didn't paint it gold.
They overlaid it with gold.
They overlaid it with gold. So you know how your dad wants a gold-plated heated toilet seat? Well, they did that to the entire building. I'm like, and he's like, whoa. I'm like, yeah, whoa. Like this is why now you realize later in the prophets, when they start worshiping these Canaanite gods that they cover with gold and silver, right? And he calls them scarecrows that guard watermelons. Now you know where they get that from. They get the practice of covering them in gold from the temple. That's why it's so abominable, because it's such a gross caricature of the temple.
That was the tabernacle. But that's all. And that wasn't the golden calf, though. That was not overlaid with gold.
No.
But the ark was. The Ark of the Covenant was. And that was just so the blood didn't soak into the wood, right? Like on the cross.
That too. Yeah, exactly. And the ground.
It was just practical.
Yeah.
Like, no, it's also beautiful.
Just trying to protect ourselves. So, yeah. So that being said, you want to dive into Habakkuk, since we promised last week?
Yeah, I think we
hit
should.
the bump and then we'll just slide
bumping it with the A here. There we go.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. This is the Banned Books Podcast, episode number 348. And we are your hosts, Christopher Gillespie.
Chillin' Willin', maxin' relaxin' in the morning.
And I am Donovan Riley. Welcome to everyone who's been with us on the live stream for the past almost half hour. Thank you to everyone who's listening to us on your podcast platform. Thank you to 1517 for this forum that we can have these conversations. I hope that they are worth your time and attention and inspire you and provoke you to think more deeply about such things. To everyone who's been emailing us and texting us, especially in regards to our last 3 or 4 episodes. That's great for the encouragement. And if I promise to call you, I will definitely call. And I am reading your emails and sharing them with Gillespie, who says that they're too long and he won't read them because he's a curmudgeon.
Wait a minute. We have our roles clearly defined here. You get to talk for a few hours with me, right? And then you get to write some show notes and answer the emails. And then I get to turn it into something that people can hear and listen to.
There we go.
Anyway.
It's a dance.
You know,
so you're saying that
fight over who actually
I'm the one who has to respond. Yeah. P.S.
It's delegated authority here. Okay.
That's right. That was me.
From somebody.
Was backing up. But thank you for all the emails and questions about theological imagination in particular. I'm glad that people are provoked to even to take that into consideration. One of the ways, just real quick before we dive into Habakkuk, because Luther's going to get into this, one of the ways that you can think about what we're discussing regarding theological imagination is to read those who themselves go into this territory, like C.S. Lewis in particular. He's an obvious one. Tolkien, you can read Tolkien's letters, for example, where he discusses all of this. You can read On Fairy Stories by Tolkien. You can read On Fairy Stories by Chesterton, which is shorter, a little essay, where they delve into these things. And then there's people that we've talked about, such as Jonathan and Matteo Pajot. There's Martin Shaw. There's Paul Kingsnorth. Even Mary Harrington, to a certain extent, is addressing modernity and feminism in particular from the perspective of saying, I don't actually believe in progress, and I think we're doomed. And I mean that in a positive sense. And I've gotten in trouble online for even posting these types of things where people are like, why aren't you more optimistic? It's like optimism and hope are not the same things, even though you think they are. I am not optimistic about the future, which is why I hope for.
I look forward to
I look very forward
the world
to
to
what's
come. Yes, the world to come.
Right. And so, yes, in the old English, we are doomed as a civilization, as so many before us have been doomed by their own hubris and conceit.
Is doom related to Dominus? I wonder.
Doom, dome, covering. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
And so this is good for us who are looking at society and asking, well, it doesn't quite seem like modernity followed through on its promises that innovation and technology and progress were going to make our lives not only better, but almost kind of like the Star Trek version of modernity, the humanist Star Trek ethos.
Well, that's the most utilitarian and utopian view, which I don't know. I don't know if you can have a utopia with utilitarianism, but
well, the pushback to Star Trek was the post-Vietnam generation, which are the ones who came up with the apocalypse and post-apocalyptic movies in the 80s that you and I grew up on, which conditioned us to always be ready, which is why, again, during 2020 and 2021, Gen X were the generation who are like, I don't see the problem here. Like, this doesn't bother me at all. Like, I'm ready.
Well, we weren't exactly, I wouldn't say, I mean, at least you would say rebels, maybe not full-on anarchists or something like that. But it was like, no, we're not going to do what you tell us. Like, why would we?
I grew up raising myself.
Like, yeah, so you had latchkey. You had latchkey. That's true.
I was a latchkey kid. I was feral. I was the one who left at 8 a.m. and came home at 8 at night, 9 at night.
And we've talked about where the wild things are, right? That's your life.
Exactly.
Or Calvin and Hobbes, same idea. Like
same thing. Yeah.
He lives in a different universe than his parents. There's no way.
100%. And there's, and it's not even romanticism if you've already lived through that. It's more along the lines of nostalgia for, it was getting shot in the face with a BB gun, for example, when I was 5, during a BB gun war at a birthday party. Yeah, it hurt at the time, but after the fact that I have to pay hundreds of dollars in taxes just to own a gun makes me a little nostalgic for the good old days. Hose water, 100%. And everything else that goes with it, riding around in the back seat of my friend's dad's station wagon facing backwards, and all the bottle rocket wars. And
what I was thinking about was we've been praying Psalm 33 all week. That was the psalm last week, Sunday, and the way that the psalmist confesses that everything is under God's lordship, right? And so, but we act as if we're like super fragile. Well, how can that possibly be true if we're actually under God, right? I mean, in a he's the king, and like all the kingdoms of this earth, they think they can trust in their war horses or their war machines,
right?
And it's like, well, no, you're just rebelling against what God has given.
I had a teenager ask, "Is it true that you guys used to have to go up on the roof?" I'm like, "What do you mean had to?" we just wanted to be on the roof of the house. We climbed trees. We built tree forts with our own hands without asking for help. Like, I was always up something. Like,
did you have to ask somebody permission to nail that into the tree?
Right, no. Like, they're like, weren't you afraid of falling? I'm like,
whose wood was that? I found it. I found the wood behind the barn.
I fell out of a tree or a tree house. Like, again, I fell onto my back or onto my face out of a tree fort. I just got up, wiped the dirt off, literally walked it off, and just climbed back up the tree fort and finished.
I mean, there are times where I tell my children, don't dig a hole there, please. But
yes, right, yeah.
But you want to put them in a situation where they can just dig holes and build things and just
how are you going to do a flying elbow if you're not on the roof? You need to get altitude so you get the right arc. This is how this works. But no, it's to the point that for our generation now, that we were 30 when we were 10, and then we were still 30 when we were 30, and I'm still 30 even though I'm 52. And I'll be 30 when I'm 80.
I can't even imagine it. I was listening to a 35-year-old on a podcast, and I'm like, oh man, they're young. They're actually a lot younger than me.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think of myself that way. I don't know.
So I'll give you a point of comparison. When you and I go classic movies, we're like Breakfast Club. Turns out Mean Girls is now considered a classic by people that were born. Yeah.
Oh, it's like classic rock stations, right?
You're
like, wait a minute, that's Pearl Jam and Nirvana.
Yeah. To like millennials,
they're all,
or whatever. Mean Girls is their classic. Whereas what's really funny, it's sad funny, but to say that Breakfast Club is a classic movie to us is the same as our parents saying that like Breakfast at Tiffany's or something was a classic movie to them. Like the Wild Bunch, like not the cowboy western, but the one with Martin Brando where they're on bikes, where they were bikers and they were all bad guys in the 50s.
I mean, you can see this sometimes where they do the remakes, right? So
Right.
Naomi really likes the original Parent Trap, right? But I think a lot of people probably had never seen it. The one with
The original's great. The second one is
the original.
Freaky Friday is
right,
pretty good too, though.
Yeah, but the remakes are kind of like, it's not the
remakes.
same. As soon as you said
They don't have the
apocalyptic
magic.
movie, I was thinking Road Warrior, and it's like, how many people have seen Road Warrior?
Yeah.
It was like, well, the effects are cheap or something. You're like, and it takes too long, and the movie's slow.
They're also real. They're cheap because there's no effects. Those are real car crashes, and those are real explosions, and those are real stuntmen flying through the air. Cheap.
Yeah.
Back in my day, that's where we're at, and I embrace it now. Like when I say back in my day, I'm like, you guys suck. Like objectively, your life sucks because you live in constant
like
fear.
the people that did the like 50 CinemaScope version of Phantom Menace. Have you seen the fake trailer? They're like, that's actually why Phantom Menace doesn't work, because it doesn't have the aesthetic of the original movies.
Yeah. 100%.
It's too fake. It's got too many.
No one's carrying
effects.
an ice cream maker around the Cloud City. Exactly. It's not real. Obi-Wan's not talking into a women's razor.
Yeah.
So there. But no, I think this is, and to bring it back around to the point then, is
and
that
prophets?
as Gen X...
Are we going to get to prophets?
Yes. Well, that's my point, though, is that I shared that with you by Matthew Pezzo this morning about being a prophet, is no one listens to us, even though we were right about everything. And the reason we were right is because we grew up in an era in which we were taught to question everything, because our parents grew up in Vietnam and they were betrayed by the idealism of the 1950s.
Yeah.
And so my parents at least said, never, ever trust authority, the government, or anyone who tells you you have to do something because it's for God and country. Like my dad raised me that way. He's a Vietnam vet.
Yeah, the man.
The man, exactly, the man. And again, growing up, I knew woke people. They were black people who taught me a lot about civil society. They're like, never listen to the man. I'm like, what's the man? And they're like, I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't understand that. Then I got to high school. I was like, oh, the man. Now I understand.
Well, it's funny too, because I said this to Ann the other day, because people were saying, oh, NPR has been biased or something. I'm like,
yeah, I saw that article.
That's like written by a NPR guy between. Well, yeah, right. So they said never judge a book by its cover. But what would be the thing? The headlines are. We knew that the news media was lying to us. We knew about. We've known this about newspapers from 100 years previous, right? Yeah. It's like we just assumed that they weren't always telling us the truth. And so I'm like, well, where did it change? This morning, though, I thought, I thought I got them right, because the children said to me, I said, well, how do you know Jesus rose from the dead? Well, because it's history. I'm like, what? But do you believe everything that's written in the history books? And they're like, no. I'm like, so we're talking about like the gift of the Holy Spirit, and that these are eyewitnesses, but without the Spirit, even eyewitness testimony is not trustworthy, and all this sort of thing. And then I said, well, let me give you an example, right? That the Titanic isn't the ship that sank to the bottom of the ocean. And the other one's like, yeah, it was the Olympia. I'm like, what are you? I'm like, where did you hear that? That they changed the names? They're like, yeah, we already know that. Okay, this is YouTube. It apparently has opened up the ability for people to question,
to your point,
popular narrative.
The assassination of Kennedy and that coup was like the turning point for us historically. We were raised in the shadow of that. September 11th is the turning point for millennials and Gen Z. That's their turning point in history.
It is.
And so for us, like the assassination of Kennedy and the intelligence community coup that led to Vietnam and everything, and de-escalation and escalation and so on. And then coming out of that into the 70s, like we were talking about backstage, most of my male teachers were vets. They had been in, like like I've said, my librarian, Mr. Drescher, was a Green Beret in Vietnam, and he had seen some things, obviously. And yet that was a man that I immediately wanted to impress. So in high school, when I turned the corner as a sophomore, and I'm like, no, I'm going to be a rebel, like a hardcore rebel. And I'm going to hang out with the burnouts, and I'm going to smoke cigarettes, but I'm going to still be in track and blah, blah. But like when I walked into the library, whatever my attitude was towards my other teachers, when I walked into the library and Mr. Drescher saw me, I immediately was high and tight. Like I want him to be impressed by me, right? And my literature teacher, Mr. Haugen, was the same way, also a Green Beret. And so I got A+ in literature classes because Mr. Haugen, I wanted to meet that standard. And he didn't do anything or say anything, but being around him and seeing how he interacted with people, adults and his students, I was like, that's somebody I can, because my dad was a Vietnam vet, but he wasn't like those guys. He didn't have the same attitude, mentality. And so then the guys that weren't veterans that I encountered as teachers, they didn't have that thing, whatever that thing is, that kind of aura around them. And I rebelled against them. And to me later, I would have said, well, they were soft. And the guys that had been through this really harsh experience and been changed by it,
Right.
they changed me because they were still in they just gotten out of the army. I didn't know that in first, second, third, fourth grade, right? I didn't know that
Right.
in the 80s, that they were literally like a decade or 15 years out of Vietnam. As I got older, I came to appreciate it. But now we have another generation of kids who have teachers who are Afghan veterans, Iraq veterans, served, got injured, buried people. And now we need to take them and bring them into the schools and have them bring in that same attitude of like, I've been through things, I've seen things, I've had to bury people, I've been heartbroken, I've been broken in my body and my soul. And I'm going to bring a level, a standard of performance to you guys as children and set the standard for you so that when you grow up, instead of growing into victims who need constant therapy and self-diagnose themselves constantly and are overly feminized and soft, I'm going to give you an option to this, right? And like for me, I came around to that after I got sober, but it was still a lighthouse in the midst of that darkness, is like to go back to those men and say like, okay, they were there for me. Right. And what I see is that unlike the Vietnam generation who that happened with, and then again, don't trust the government, don't trust the man, don't trust this, the post 9/11 generation, we were told, trust the government, we're going to protect you, trust the government. And so even though they know the things like about, the China virus and stuff, they've been conditioned since birth to just go along, to be together.
But I think they went too far. At least what I've experienced is that a lot of, I think it's their parents, but even the children are like, no, we're going to question everything now.
Right.
Right.
And that's why I say Gen Xers, again, I play video games with my kids. Like I still play with my kids. I spar with my kids. My dad would never do those things with me. It's a different generation. So when I get to be 60, 70, 80, I'm still going to be that person. Like when I was in my 20s, people said, wait till you turn 30. Then in my 30s, they said, wait till you turn 40. Then in my 40s, they say, wait till you turn 50. This is our generation. Like we recognize that, again, we were adults when we were 10 because we had to take care of ourselves and raise ourselves and figure stuff out for ourselves. So when I hit 30, I was just like, oh, now I can start living. And now that I'm at 50, I'm like, I like being 50 because I can say what I want. I don't really care what people think. But I still have that childish quality in me.
I think it's a little bit different too. Maybe it's whatever your context was, but for me, it was a greater sense of like, I guess, vertical integration between the generations. Like, I mean, I came out of a really, healthy family structure. So we spent time with aunts and uncles and played games with them or spent time with younger siblings or younger, nieces and nephews. And the grandparents were around and all of that. And it was well integrated. But that also happened in our churches. They were integrated. We didn't do as much segregation so it wasn't like you were aspiring to be older necessarily because you already were interacting with them. They were there. Yeah. 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 So, so there may be a cultural component to this as well.
No, 100%. Because I was raised by my aunts who were in their teens when I was born. And I was raised by my grandmas who were single. They were divorced, both of them.
So it's more tribal then, I guess, is what you'd say.
For sure. Yeah, and I think that's the thing, though, is that when people come in, we're the ones now who are saying to the younger people, you should question everything. Question me about God. Challenge me. I welcome it. Versus like, we don't talk about that in church.
Well, and I think it's this other thing, too, is what's happened is just out of necessity because of the failure of higher authority, I guess. Actually, everything's gotten inverted in a very helpful way to say, no, actually, my family and my community, my congregation, these are the highest authority to me. This is where God is most at work for me. Right. And those people like, downstate or on the other side of the country or the other side of the world, they don't really have much to contribute to me. They're not... Right. They can't really have any authority over me because they're too distant. Right. And even then, like, it's fine. We can go, explore and we can get to know each other. We can have pen pals or whatever, but it's not the same. It's like, no, these people here are the people that are most valuable to me because of the people I have to interact with day after day. Right.
Well, and this is the point then, is that we can teach them that, God is wild and you should be wild. You should be wild. Not feral like we were as kids, but you should be wild.
And so you're talking about yourself. And then, a lot of autobiography here.
Well, everybody, all the kids that I grew up with, we were all feral kids. We just ran in packs on bikes. Again, you knew where everybody's at because there was 15 bikes in the front yard. And so you just rode your bike around until you saw all the bikes, and then you're like, everyone's here. And then you just go there. And be home when the streetlights come on. But my point is then, we understand what it means to be wild and free. to the edge of I fell out of a tree, like I fell off a roof, like I got shot.
Or I
in the face
blew up
with
the
a BB gun.
computer, or
There might have
I mean,
something. There might have been fires, but like we understand that, right? Because we've lived that, we've experienced that, we've hacked phones, we've done things, right?
oh, I was just going to say it. You jumped ahead of me.
Yeah, yeah.
I did all sorts
And
of things
so
that I probably shouldn't tell you
I can
about.
then say on the other side of the street, though, when God brings you into the center and says it's time to now be calm, He's going to bring you into the liturgy.
Yeah.
This ancient structure that is literally primordial. It's the foundation of creation. It's the first chapter of the book. It is the once upon a time. The liturgy is the expression of that once upon a time. And this is exotic and it's weird. It sounds weird because it's in language that we don't use anymore, and it says things that are weird because we don't have the same cosmology and we're materialists. But we're going to do it every single week because this is when God comes to the center with angels, archangels, with all the dead that are a part of that company of heaven. And then when He sends you out of the center, back outside the walls, into the wild place, which is the world, He's going to say to you, follow me, we're going to do some stuff. And it's going to get wild. And it's going to get dangerous. It's going to be super dangerous. And again, I've said this before. I've said this for years now, which is teenagers must rebel. It's a hormonal, chemical process of puberty. We all do it. It's inevitable. It's a part of reality, right? So why not give them something to rebel against? So I give all the kids in church something to rebel against, which is their parents' religion and the culture. And to say, challenge your parents and ask them why they believe this. Then challenge the culture and say to the culture, why do you believe this? And then they come back in and say,
tell my kid that they could speak against me.
Yeah.
I'm like, well,
yeah.
You don't come to church. So I told them they should tell you that or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Give them an answer.
I told them when we were doing I told the kids that when we were doing the Passion reading that they should when the cock crowed they should make rooster noises, but they didn't. They said they forgot. I was like, oh, come on, guys.
Well, you have to do it for
I thought my parents.
Yeah, I barked like a dog in one of my sermons. Kids loved it. And because talking about the dog Gentiles, the barbarians.
Right, exactly.
But that's the point, is that you as the pastor are not only a symbol, but the earthly embodiment of this God who every time he comes around polite society is told by polite society, you need to get the hell out of here or we will kill you. So or
get in line, get in order.
Every time he goes into the temple, they want to stone him. Every time he heals someone, they want to kill him. Like there's a constant counter push to God coming, like going back to Exodus, like you said, same thing, this constant push against that. And yet
not those people, not this time.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And Shaw stole it from Greeley, but it is, in my experience anyways, in my personal autobiographical experience, is that we want to tame Jesus because we don't want a God who's outside of containment. We can't contain him. And we think like, oh, God's in church on Sunday. It's like, but I need God in my life every day. And not just, I feel God's presence. No. I mean an embodied in the world, blood on the ground, poured out water from his side onto the ground and made the world his chalice, kind of wild God. And if you're a bad storyteller, you're not going to be able to capture that lightning. So learn the stories and then tell them because they're universally true. The old ones, the old ancient stories, like the first day of creation story, like John chapter 1 type of stuff, like Colossians type of stuff, like Revelation 20 and 21 and so on stuff. Like tell those stories to kids and do it with all of the seriousness of it. Like, oh, this happened to me right before I got to church this morning. Because it does. You're just not looking for it. You're not paying attention to it. Right. But once you do, now all of a sudden you've created a whole generation of kids who want to be part of the liturgy and want to be in church because they see it as the ultimate form of rebellion.
Well, and I did it on Sunday, and I did it again this morning because we read John 20, and I was like, so Thomas wanted to put his finger in the wounds and stick his hand on the side, and so I invite them to to imagine
being sarcastic
doing that,
as Thomas often is. Yes,
right. Or Jesus, or he actually did it, and it's like, well, now what would that be like? Now, why would he want to put his finger there? Why in those?
That's a Cronenberg movie, right? That's a Cronenberg movie.
Yeah, no, very much so.
Existence.
And it's a bloody affair too. It's a bloody thing.
Yes.
And they get it. They're like, because when they think, they don't just see they don't think the print of the nails. They think that everybody, the younger ones anyway, they all go to blood. It's always about blood. I'm like,
right, of course, because they're kids.
Everybody's thinking, yeah, exactly. And that's the what do we say, the higher reality or the lower? I don't know. I mean, is it more basic or is it more high? I don't. Either way, it's like no, there's got to be blood.
Well, it's both.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's both.
Yeah. Yeah. And so they get that, and it's cool. It's cool. And I know they're thinking the rest of the day, well, like, what would it be to have my hand in Jesus' side? What would that feel like? You know?
Yeah.
Like, well, I mean, he tells Thomas to do it. So he wants you to think about it, right?
At root, what we're saying is we need to recapture mystery. We need to stop abusing the mystery of Christ. In fact, there is a book by Robert Capon called The Mystery of Christ and Why We Don't Get It.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that.
Which is a great book. I think we've
read
read it on
title
the show,
anyway.
actually.
Yeah.
But we've lost it. We've lost that sense of mystery. We've flattened reality. We've made everything about a materialist worldview, both architecturally, but also within the context of worship, which we don't need to get into because we've talked about it. But the point is, there's a reason in Britain, for example, right now, there's a renewal of Christian faith, and the people that are converting are going east. There's a reason. And we can ignore it, and we can, disagree with the Eastern Orthodox Church in all of its different, forms, Russian, Greek, whatever. But the fact of the matter is they're going for the liturgy, they're going for the tradition, they're going for the mystery, they're going for the priests, and to be mentored in the faith in a very deep and profound and scriptural way. And we should listen. We should always listen. Even if there were, again, I say even, if there were a massive renewal of people converting to the Baptist church, for example, in the United States, I would listen.
Sure. Yeah, of course.
Because I want to know, what is it exactly that is drawing you into that particular church?
Well, you could ask this about, in the United States, the charismatic movements, right? The big ones, the big revivals, the tent revivals. Yeah. What was it about those, right?
Right.
We
what
read
was it a reaction to?
Well, there's that too, yeah. We read Capon on 2 different occasions. So episodes 68 through 70 and episodes 202, 203. So we've gone to it twice already. So, yeah.
Right.
So you can go watch those.
To Jared's point on the live stream, mystery and emotion and storytelling is something you missed. Divorce emotion from that. Emotion is a consequence, but it's not a direction, and it's not a goal of storytelling.
In the same way that joy is a fruit of the Spirit. It's a fruit
it's
of
a consequence of the Spirit, but it's not indicative. Right? Suffering is indicative of the Spirit too. That also
I've said this to people. I mean, I do want people to leave like comforted or consoled or but I don't actually have control over that because that's the Spirit's work. So I preach the message that brings comfort, and if if the Spirit works that, thanks be to God. Some days you're going to leave kind of the same as you came. I don't know.
Lot.
It's not,
especially this time of year after Easter, right? The
it's kind of a downer.
Easter, the
it's kind of a downer. Yeah.
We have the low.
We keep doing the pageantry, but it just kind of gets a little bit. Stale's the wrong word. It gets normal, I guess.
Yeah, it does. Right. People
don't
realize
I'm going to do creative worship all summer, by the way.
Yeah.
Did I tell you that?
No, you didn't tell me.
All summer. Oh, yeah. No, I'm going to do it all summer. We're going to see how it goes.
Creative worship, huh? You use finger puppets?
Not that creative. Come on.
Okay.
We're going to sing different Kyries or something. That's what we're going to do. We're still going to sing the Kyrie. We're just going to sing different
ones. Well, in Wisconsin, doesn't that mean like camo stoles or something like that? Or flip-flops and camo stoles?
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that. Oh, there's the hunter's worship where you wear orange.
Yeah. Yeah, no. I've been in churches where I've gone into the vestry, opened the closet, and been horrified by the stoles.
If you go a little bit farther north, you get the polkas.
Yes, you do. Well, they used to have that here. I moved it into the basement for the potluck, but yeah.
No, they would have polka liturgies. And I'm like, well, if we can have polka liturgies, then why can't we have?
There's a country western church down the road from me. They do country western worship.
I've sent it's been a long time since we posted it, but the Lutheran churches in Scandinavia with their metal worship, into that. Totally into that. I can see metal.
That's, by the way, folks, for you listening, that's all a product of materialism. That's what all that
exactly.
worship style.
How can we appeal to people who don't even care?
Yeah, it's a consumer-based philosophy.
Then we can bring out the quote from King of the Hill, right? You're not making Christianity better, you're making rock worse.
Rock music or polka music or country and western music or
metal
music
or whatever.
Worse.
Yeah.
Again, I'm telling you right now, this is not what kids are looking for. They're looking for mystery. They're looking for ancient traditions. They're looking to be a part of something that's so much bigger than themselves.
I'm always sensitive to the music itself, right? Fair enough, because some of the musical modes that we sing in are not very popular sounding at all.
Right.
And so, or if it's chant even, right? If it's actually like straight up Gregorian. And then, so I'm sensitive to that. And so I'll point it out. And then people are always like, but the words are so good. I'm like,
exactly.
Where did this come from? I mean, this is great. That's exactly right. The words are great. That's why we sang it.
Right.
Right.
Well, they're time tested.
Right. Distilled.
They've been around. Some of them have been around for more than 2,000 years.
Yeah, that's true. Well, we sang for the vigil. We sang the canticles, so like Song of Moses and the Song of Habakkuk. By the way, was really good.
Yeah.
Have you read that one? Or sung that one? That's really good.
Yeah. I wonder too on this point. Since we're wandering again, we don't understand virtue anymore because we don't study it. We don't learn virtue, and so we don't know what goodness, beauty, and truth have to do with each other.
Just
when I say them, people treat them as like
or
triptychs, like they're three things. It's like, no, actually they're like a trinity, actually. They're a unity and multiplicity again. Goodness, beauty, and truth as virtues are actually interconnected. And in the early church, they're the virtues, and the virtues are the lower hierarchy of angels. They're actually angelic beings.
Yeah.
And so even goodness, beauty, and truth point to Jesus. And I think because we don't learn these things, when I talk about goodness and beauty and truth, people think I'm talking in a kind of like philosophical Greek sense. And I am in one sense, but I'm talking in a higher heavenly sense. I'm talking about Jesus and the angelic choir. And so when I say beauty, well, beauty actually is a consequence of goodness. Goodness is revealed through beauty and truth is revealed through goodness and beauty. They function as, again, like a trinity. But we don't learn these things. So then when I say beauty, people immediately go to something that they think is beautiful. I'm like, no, that's not what I mean. Like beauty isn't aesthetic. Beauty is something much deeper. It's, again, a spiritual, heavenly meaning.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you say that, it reminds me, I don't know who told me this, but it finally clicked for me that the reason why our schools used to use more of what they call a classical model now, but that grammar, logic, and rhetoric are actually are a reflection of goodness, truth, and beauty, or goodness, beauty, and truth.
I've heard that before too.
Yeah, I mean, in a lower sense, it's not.
I was going to say I don't think that's true. Actually, I disagree with that premise. But I think it's downstream a ways.
Well, but it's goodness, beauty, and truth in language, in particular, like the form of language.
Yep. Oratory, sure.
So that's why it seemed compatible.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
But we don't teach it because we didn't. If you don't learn it, you can't teach it. You're not aware of it. It's like I've said before. You can't ask a question if you've never been presented with the stranger, the mystery. And so when we talk about, well, this isn't a very beautiful thing, or this is so beautiful, I'm like, why is it beautiful? Well, it just makes me feel this way. I'm like, that's not beauty, actually. Emotions have almost nothing to do with beauty.
Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Haven't you heard that?
Exactly. That's just a fancy way of saying my truth. That's all that is.
It is.
Versus,
well, that's
how does this point?
Downstream from that. Yeah. All right.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
As if there is no such thing as objectivity, right? Truth.
Yeah. Right. Then, whatever I think is beautiful on a production level, on a consumer level, if it works because it gets butts in the seats and pays the bills, it's beautiful. It's good.
Oh,
I mean, good is so tied up now
even
to
that,
consumerism.
Those words are ugly. Stop speaking.
Of course they are.
You're making me uncomfortably grossed out.
Uncomfortably. Okay. You're making me feel all oogly. So chapter 2 then of Luther's, the reason that we were talking about this last week is this is in volume 19 of Luther's works. The commentary or lectures on Habakkuk, both in Latin and German, they follow Jonah, Luther's commentary on Jonah. And when I was at seminary and I was taking the readings in the Theology of the Cross class, Jonah was one of the things that we read. So I've always read Jonah and then put the book away. I've read Habakkuk.
I didn't even know it had been translated. Yeah, it's all here.
But then last week when we were reading it in the Bornkamm book on Luther and the Old Testament, I was like, Habakkuk, where's that at? And as soon as I saw it on the shelf, I immediately was like, oh, that's right.
It's those minor prophet volumes that we don't pull off too often.
Yes. And yet, like I said, Jonah packs a real punch. If there's, and to the point, like Galatians is thick with 2 C's. So maybe you don't think about taking the Galatians commentary on a road trip, but these smaller works like volume 19 on Jonah and Habakkuk, this is like 2 sticks of dynamite that you can just carry around in a backpack or anywhere with you. It's small, dense though, so dense. Because this is Luther.
Well,
what we're reading
they're
today
short books.
50,
I mean, that's the advantage. Short books, short lectures.
Yeah. Yes.
So you can just really
But this is Luther at full power. He's extremely potent in these things. So when he says things, there are sentences and paragraphs that you could spend a long time just kind of ruminating on. The whole tree is dropping fruit.
So that Song of Habakkuk's at the end of chapter 3. So that would be, but I had never sung it. I didn't know there was even a setting of it in our hymnal, and there is. I was like, well, that's nice. Let's try it out.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Cool
Music's
stuff
okay.
in the back of the hymnal that kind of hides. They threw back.
Well, I've told you about this. All the things that they just didn't put in because they didn't think it would fly in the last few generations of hymnals. And it's too bad.
It's all about it's your congregation. Some congregations sing, some are not, and
but here's the point. The things that are included, the goal has always been maximum usage, right? So they want to get all the churches in conformity using the same song, same da-da-da-da-da, right? And so then the wild stuff they have to put in the accessory volumes that nobody looks at.
Yep, exactly.
Exactly. That's funny.
So we may even have to do 2 episodes because that would be fun to read the Song of Habakkuk too.
Especially that's in chapter 3.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it's broken down really nicely too.
By Luther?
Into pieces. Well, it's first verse, second verse.
Oh, yeah,
verse.
He does it.
Yeah,
that's
it's
how he
really
does
nice.
It. He does it as
to hell with it. Let's go to chapter 3. We might as well since we're talking about it.
Okay.
We read about chapter 2 in the episode last week in Borncom, so you guys can go read that in Borncom. And then go by volume 19. Call up CPH.
This is the prayer of the prophet Habakkuk for the innocent? Is that where we're going?
Yep. This is the song. Chapter 3, page 227, volume 19. This
German
is the prayer
text
of the prophet Habakkuk for the innocent. Submitting his innocence to God. David, too, uses such a title in Psalm 7, verse 1. But in Hebrew, this means as much as ignorantia et ignorantiae, ignorance of all ignorances.
Isn't that great? That's a great statement.
I'm going to ignore you to the highest degree that I can possibly ignore you. So if we were to speak Latin, we might choose the word inconscientia when a person is unaware of something, or when this does not touch his conscience, as was true of David in the aforementioned psalm. And again, pre-enlightenment understanding of conscience is one's standing in relation to God and neighbor. It's not an internal dialogue. It's monologue. It's an external dialogue between 2 people or more.
And what informs the conscience?
God's word. Yeah.
Yes.
And so David is actually addressing to God his relationship with God in the psalm. That's what he's referring to. So when Shimei accuses him in 2 Samuel 16 of having wrested the kingdom from Saul, he indicated that his conscience knew nothing of this. I didn't stab him to death in his sleep. I had, as he says to Shimei, right? I had a lot of chances to kill him, and I didn't.
Yeah, the whole bit with the little bit of his cloak while he was sitting on the toilet.
Right, exactly.
In the cave, yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite stories.
That's right.
It's like, what are you doing in the toilet with... Okay, well, anyway.
Right. just waiting for my moment. In the absence of a better German term, we must translate this with Unschuld, that is, innocence. However, this is too strong a term, for it sounds far humbler and far more Christian to boast before God, not of one's innocence, but of one's conscience. My God, why have you abandoned me? Right?
Yeah.
That's a confession of conscience.
Relationship.
The relationship has apparently gone very, very sour. But then Thomas, to your earlier point, my Lord and my God, which is a statement of absolute awe, reverence,
and
overshadowed.
How is his conscience set right? Is Jesus saying, peace to you? Look at my hands and my side.
Yeah, go ahead.
Peace to you.
Look. Although I always read that as Jesus returning the sarcasm. No. Come on. It's like
Put
at
your
Babel,
hand
right?
here.
The priest at Babel are like, come down, God. Come down, God. He's like, okay, I'm coming. And then he comes down like, oh, crap.
Too close.
Too close. And I was
Back up.
Because every time John gives Thomas any space, it's always sarcasm. Oh, I guess we'll just go to Jerusalem and die with them then. Like that kind of thing. But either way, good times. Good times with the resurrected God. So it sounds far humbler and far more Christian to boast before God, not of innocence, but of conscience. For a person may not feel any evil in his conscience and yet not be innocent. As Paul declares in 1 Corinthians 4, verse 4, I am not aware of anything against myself, but I am not thereby acquitted. It is the Lord who judges me.
I always love that
Only
line.
God can judge me.
Because you know that when the church in
Yeah.
Corinth, the people are hearing this epistle read out
Yes.
loud to them, they're like, Paul, do you remember? They're ready to
Right.
inform his conscience
Right.
with all the things that he's done against them.
I was going to say, they're basically saying to Paul, but you're not our pastor. You don't have
Mhm.
authority over us. You're not even here. And he's saying, whoa, 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 whoa. Slow your roll.
Yeah.
I've been absolved, but that doesn't mean then that I'm innocent. There's a difference.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
thus
No, that's helpful.
Abimelech too had a clear conscience when he took Sarah, and yet his deed was wrong before God. Genesis chapter 20, verse 3 and following. Thus Habakkuk here wants to pray for the godly who were led away to Babylon together with the ungodly. For undoubtedly there were many godly people among these, such as Daniel and his companions. These were innocent. That is, they had no bad conscience. They were not aware of any evil, and yet they had to go along. For as St. Paul says, it is God who judged them. In Jeremiah 25:29, God himself professes that they did not deserve to drink such a cup. But call it innocence, ignorance, a free conscience, or whatever you like. As long as the correct meaning is present, one may be patient with the term. I believe that we Germans express this best when we say a prayer for the innocent.
So he's doing, what do we call this in exegesis? We call it semantic domain, right?
Yes,
so you've got a
yes.
word, and here's kind of the multiplicity of the possible meanings, and we can
Right.
understand it in or there's different ways to translate it. We do this all the time, right? I mean, this is what
Yeah.
we do. Luther's teaching us to do the same.
This is fun philology.
Mm-hmm.
Because, of course, you always end up with, the German's still the best.
We'll just settle on it. I mean, that's basically what he says at the end.
Let's agree to disagree. I'm right. Yes.
Nice.
But it's also important for the people that he's addressing, which is native German speakers. You don't need to be a Latin scholar to understand this.
Oh, yeah, that's helpful too. And remember, we didn't actually say this. So we're looking at the German text. This was a year after the Latin text was published. So,
Right.
And I think 1520s, he's endorsing everything that's getting printed. Well, not everything, but a lot of the things they're running past. You know, is this a faithful kind of representation of the lecture? And Luther would look it over and he put his name on it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Again, his students developed their own shorthand. They developed their own language to keep up with his lectures. And then they would get together after class, compare, collate, compress, and then say, here, does this work? And he'd say yes or no. And then they'd run down to the basement and start printing them off.
Yep.
Because I'm sure there was no
Across the
small
street.
amount of money to be made off of this for themselves too, because Luther didn't care about making money off of his lectures and commentaries. But there were a lot of people that were making a lot of money off of them.
Well, I mean, that's the way economies work, right? There's
It
the
is.
people who say it, there's the people who see it as valuable, and then there's the people who make the money off of it.
Right. As I've said before, by the mid or late 1530s, 90+% of all the published text in Germany were Luther, or people claiming to be Luther. Like you want to talk about a monopoly on the market. Everything he wrote was being published. It was being intercepted by publishers as messengers carried the manuscripts around. They were copying it and publishing it and selling it. So I don't mean like 90% of all the titles in Germany were Luther's hand. I'm saying 90% of everything that was published and sold was from Luther, one way or another. Right? As I've said before, when Luther responded to Erasmus, most of Germany, most of Saxony knew Luther's response before Erasmus even read it. Because every town that the messenger went through, the publishers stopped them in the city and said, we got to open this. I need to write this and publish this so I can sell it. So by the time it gets to Erasmus, most of Saxony's already read his response. Imagine, it's like the internet. So the first verse then, O Lord, I have heard the report of thee, and I am afraid. As is proper for a good prayer, he begins the prayer with praise and thanks. For he enumerates many great miracles that God had shown the fathers, saying, I have heard much said about you, for our fathers told us, leaving this behind them in writings. Thus Psalm 44 verse 1 declares, we have heard with our ears, O God, our fathers have told us, etc. Such a report and proclamation of you causes me to fear. That is, I regard you highly. I fear you and stand in awe of you. I do not despise you as the ungodly do, who hear nothing about you or know nothing of you, or hear with unbelief and ignore it. This is great. This is
fantastic.
This is Passion Tide stuff. Yeah, this is Passion Tide plus Thomas.
Well, there's that. And I'm also just thinking, when we look at the failings of the modern church, right? We're always talking about these things. And I kind of laugh about that because it's like, well, it's not anything particular to modern. I mean, there's uniqueness, I suppose. But what's the failure is that the fathers haven't told the children what God has done, and who he is, and what he said. There's no fear of God. Why? Because the fathers don't fear God, right? And
I slightly disagree with that because there is a whole generation that said that all of our wealth and all of our success and all of our prosperity is because of God, that we're God's country.
Well, that's not fearing God, though.
No, of course it's not. But the fathers did tell them something about God.
But you're saying the wrong thing.
Well, yeah, they taught them about the civil God, the hidden God.
Yeah, that's what you're saying. The same thing. You're just saying it a different way. It wasn't that the fathers didn't teach them anything. They just didn't teach them what God had actually
I actually
done.
think it would have been better had they not taught them anything, because then they would have been open to correction and teaching, versus what you and I run into, which is, this isn't what I was taught growing up. It's like, you were taught wrong.
Well, and this reminds me of an occasion where I was getting in trouble for criticizing the civil God, but not the true God. And of course, that psalm that we've been praying all week, blessed is the nation that trusts in the Lord. Well, that obviously that's the United States of America. I'm like,
Absolutely.
What? What are you talking about? We do not fear God or his word.
Right.
Otherwise, look at what your governor, the legislature does. Tell me, is that in the fear and admonition of the Lord? Are they following? Are they?
Well, go one step further. What exactly is God's word? Well, it's Jesus. So we should probably just follow the teachings of Jesus if we want to suss out whether we're a godly country or not, huh?
Well, and then I was to point out that nation is, at least in Greek, it's ethne. It's actually ethnics.
Yeah,
and they're like,
ethne, yeah.
Oh, wait a minute. So you're not just talking about borders, and no, we're talking about peoples, and even the peoples you don't like, that you don't trust. Huh.
Right.
Okay. And so you want them to be blessed, to give them God's word. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Yeah.
Well, the backspin of that is, my question has always been on the backspin of, so if we're God's country and we bomb other countries that have done nothing to us, what does that mean about other countries?
No, we're just driving out the Canaanites, just like Israel did.
Absolutely. That's exactly what we're doing in South and Central America in the 70s. And
or
80s.
Afghanistan. Or
Afghanistan.
Where else are we currently active? Where are we active now?
Well, we can't say it on YouTube because we will be banned from YouTube for saying the I word.
Oh, that one. I was thinking of the one in the peninsula, Saudi Peninsula. What's the one down there?
The one Voltaire must have been thinking about when he wrote that famous saying about, if you want to know who has power over you, find out who you can't criticize.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So thou dost impart life to thy work in the midst of the years. Thou makest it known in the midst of the years. In tribulation thou rememberest mercy. You impart life to your work in the midst of the time, the years. You make known the midst of the years. Again, time is death. Death is time. So this is a radical statement. You give life in the midst of death. You make known life in the midst of death. This is why Jesus says, I am the life, the resurrection and the life. And therefore, in tribulation, you remember your faithful loving kindness, your compassion, your chesed in Hebrew.
Right. And we come to learn of God in the midst of suffering, death, tribulation, right? Because that's where mercy,
I keep going
life
back to
is made
Chrysostom
known.
more and more, because it's Chrysostom who said that God is never closer to us than in our suffering, which is that's a Job thing too, like Luther's Job commentary, right? God is closer to us than our next breath, which he may have got from that tradition. But Chrysostom doesn't mean God is only near us when we suffer. What he's saying is that when we suffer, that's when we cry out to God and go, oh, you were here the whole time? Yes, yes, I am. Yeah. And
you mean in the depths of Sheol? You were there? Oh yeah.
Yeah.
On the mountaintop? Yeah, you were there.
Yeah. But it's that higher heavenly reality of the meaning of our suffering is I'm not actually suffering. In fact, I've never suffered in my life. And this is the hard truth that Scripture reveals to us. Paul goes into detail on this and goes deep on it. I've never actually suffered in my entire life. It's actually Christ's suffering. I'm experiencing Christ's death in my body.
We were talking about this before we went live, but what I've discovered is that most people don't see God active in all things.
Right.
Right. So he's limited to blessings and prosperity for the most part. Right.
Right.
But he's not there in discipline. He's not there in a harsh word. He's not there in death. He's certainly not there in loss and difficulty and heartache. And, it's like, well, what kind of God is that then?
Yeah.
He's like another one of those idols where you have a different idol for every season, right? Well,
exactly.
Things are going kind of crappy, so this is the God of war, okay? And now things are going pretty well, so it's the God of prosperity.
The God
we
of
just
weather.
have to know which.
We got to move on to weather.
The God of, right?
We want to have a baby now. Let's move on to the God of fertility. Yeah. Again, Thor, Woden, Frika. It's like the unholy trinity.
So we kind of move into this multiplicity, and then the Christian God becomes only the God of mercy, but not the mercy and tribulation, just mercy, and kind of in an abstract, or maybe in just like an emotive kind of way, I guess. The God who makes me feel better.
Right. Right.
I laugh at that because it's like, well, that's not the God that I encounter in the scripture. He doesn't always make me feel better.
So Woden works through signs, for example, right? We go to the temple in Uppsala. We have the well, we have the font, and we have to kill something, usually a person. So we throw them in the water, in the font, literally. And if they float back up, then Woden has not received our prayers. If he sinks and doesn't come back up, Woden has received my prayers. I can go home, I'm satisfied. Same thing with Frika and fertility. Same thing with Thor and the weather. So that means then, again, that there is no life out of that death. There is simply the sign from above, from Valhalla, that I have been acknowledged. I've been seen. The other failing of the gods is that they're human, they're man gods. So Thor, Woden, Frika, they're subject to the Norns. They're subject to the fates. And in Ragnarok, they too will be killed. They will not survive Ragnarok along with us. So they're always abstract. They're never embodied. And when they are embodied, when they do come amongst us, like with Woden in particular later, when he just becomes straight up Odin, when he comes amongst us, he's, again, because whether you want to understand universal history or not, Woden is Zeus. And that's because the Trojans migrated north. And so just like Zeus, when Odin comes, he impregnates village women. He steals cattle. He's up to mischief. If you catch him on a good day, he'll give you some wisdom, but it's never wisdom that you really ultimately want to know, because it's usually tragic in the end. This is the thing that most people don't understand about like Norse religion.
Does he come into the mead hall?
Nihilistic.
Is he in the mead hall?
He'll show up, but again, he's that quiet figure by the fire. And when he looks at you, you're like, there's something, he's ancient. There's an ancientness to this
fire in his eyes kind of thing.
Yeah, you don't approach it. You don't approach that. But it's extremely nihilistic because it's tragic. We're all doomed. That's kind of the end state of the myths.
So just go rape and pillage and have a good time, I guess.
Well, you want to get to Valhalla, so you can get to the mead hall. So there's at least that, right? You don't want to go to HEL. You don't want to go into the underworld. Right. That's no good. And so
there has to be some kind of hopefulness, right? It can't be purely
fatalism
nihilistic.
to it, a tragedy to it. The hope is kleos, like we talked about last week. Kleos, glory. You cannot glorify yourself, by the way. In pagan myths, you can't glorify yourself. So Odysseus receives kleos from his trials and from going through his trials. But it has to be given to you. This is back to the point of conscience now. Kleos, glory, like lasting eternal glory, is pinned to you. It's like a medal, like a ring, right? A golden ring. And it has to be given to you by your ring lord. So the gods can give you that kleos. Your fellows can give you kleos. And that's the only thing that will then survive your death is kleos, your name. So that's why you have to have sons. This is why your sons need to grow up and literally embody your kleos by mimesis, right? Mimetic activity. But it's, again, in the end, it's still abstract because it's not, I'm not going to be raised from the dead, but I will live on in my sons. You are the spitting image of your fathers, like that kind of language.
Yeah. I was thinking
about
this.
Which originally was the spirit and image, not spitting. It was literally the spirit and image that got compressed into spitting.
I was thinking about this, as we've been talking about materialism, and then, that's strongly connected to economics, right? Because it's a highly materialistic theory or set of theories. But the idea of generational wealth, right? Because this is what people are always looking for, the big thing, so they can build generational wealth. Well,
Right.
it's a kind of just very base glory. Then is what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's like a way of preserving your legacy, so that you know,
Right.
like Dale Carnegie or something, or the Rockefellers, or somebody.
Mm-hmm.
It's like their name lives on, even though their
Mm-hmm.
children are. What was
Right.
the great meme I saw? Oh, this is great. It was the great great grandson of. I just lost who it was. It was somebody noble, somebody who was really a great figure. Ulysses S. Grant. That's who it was.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So war, and then they got into business. The Grants got into business. And then his great grandson, what is he doing? Gay vampire porn.
Okay.
You're like, but yet he's wealthy, right? Because he's got
Right,
this family
exactly, yeah.
heritage that carries forward.
Generational
You're like,
wealth.
but it's not for. It's
also
glory.
not kleos.
But it's not kleos, right?
It's not glory. Actually, it's the opposite. It's actually infamy. Yeah, it's infamy.
And you can see this in the royal family in England. I think look at Charles,
of course.
right?
Yeah,
It's like he's
infamy.
nothing compared to Elizabeth, right?
Right. Right.
And relative even to Elizabeth I, right? You're going to go back,
Right.
Like
Right.
these were actual like glorious figures, and now
Mm-hmm.
Charles is like, well, you're wearing the fancy hat, but
Right.
and you've got the
Yeah,
staff.
that's all you have. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I mean, you're kind of, if you just kept the philandering like out of the main, and
Or
looked
not been
at
best
least-
friends with Jimmy Savile.
well, they're or gone to islands, yes,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right. So he's
Infamy.
not it's not respectable. So now you're right. It's infamy. It's kind of the inverse of that.
Right.
And that's why I say generational wealth is such a. I mean, okay, if you're talking about wanting to provide for your children and grandchildren, fine.
Yeah.
There's no guarantee of it. I mean, this is up to God anyway. In the end, what He's going to do
Right.
economically with this world, and with what He gives and what He takes away. And see, that's the key too,
Yeah.
right? We don't actually believe that He takes away.
The Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. Yeah. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
I know that, and that's life. So everything involved with life, right? So it includes.
Well, it's
property.
a rejection of Christ. It's just an outright rejection of Christ, because you're saying like, well, God doesn't want me to suffer. I'm like, have you never read the Bible? Like the Bible is, there's a pattern of reality. There's suffering starts relatively early in the story, right?
Yeah, except
Suffering
there-
starts right away.
I'm thinking again the scripture. It's like, well, no, but I'll take care of you in famine. That's His promise. He's like,
Yeah.
it's not that there's not going to be famine, but I'm going to take care of you.
Or that you're not going to suffer hunger, but I'll feed you.
Right.
Yeah.
We're like, well, but how are you going
Right.
to do that?
What kind of feeding? Right.
Well, and what kind of feeding? Yeah, what's that
Right.
going to look like? Or am I going to have to
Behold
be
the Lamb of
dependent on
God,
other people?
Crucified.
Yeah.
He's been suffering since He created the world. You have to change your entire ethos once you read that line. The entire
that's
ethos
true.
of how you
That's true.
engage with the Word of God is, He has suffered since day one, since the first breath of creation. He's suffered for you. Like I said, you've never suffered in your life, but you have suffered the experience of Christ's suffering in and through you.
This isn't just like some kind of strange psychological or mental exercise.
No,
where
no,
you're
no,
like,
no, no.
suffering is not suffering. It's actually joy.
No, it's not Buddhism. No, it's not
Right.
that.
Where you invert the meaning of words and
No.
do all sorts.
Jesus
like, no,
is
it's
the
still-
Logos, and Logos is reality.
It's
It's like I said in
So
my sermon. God is
pain
love
is
and
pain-
Jesus is
is-
God. Yes, it's
pain
real.
is actually
It's
still
embodied.
pain.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is what Gnosticism is. Gnosticism is that attempt to disembody ourselves so that this is transhumanism 101. How do I escape pain? Well, we're going to give you a pill that murders the thing inside of you so that you don't have to experience the birth pangs, which are the death pangs of the self. You don't have to be like Christ anymore. We're going to upset the natural order of creation.
This is not going to be popular, but
Oh, that's our show in a nutshell. So
I think we've talked about it before, but it's hard to encourage somebody who's dying not to do the morphine shot, not to keep pushing the button.
absolutely.
But I try to encourage them not to. And I can't do it when the family's around because they're like, they can't bear to see their loved one,
Yeah.
in pain.
Right.
I'm like, but this
Right.
is death. Like
This is death. Right.
Like narcotics.
And in the
are they
ninth
a
hour, he
gift?
yelled with a loud voice.
And I know we're not
Right.
Jesus. Okay. I
Yeah.
understand that. But the kind of death that I've seen when they're so doped up and they can't even pray anymore, I'm like, that's not a good thing.
Here's the thing, though. We are. Because He became sin so that we might become the righteousness of God.
Yeah. I don't know.
We are, again, the Holy Spirit takes possession of us and makes us into living stones. We are the temple of the Holy Spirit. We are the church of God in our bodies. God embodies Himself in us. And we
but
are
my point is
chosen
that,
by Christ to suffer as he suffered. This is explicit, right? As
Right.
soon as you say we're not Jesus, you're saying we're not holy, we're not called out of the world, and we're not called to die as Christ died, to bear that cross. And yes,
so
it sounds weird, it's offensive, but he is. You see what you're trying to do again.
he
I'm not
refused.
saying
He refused the narcotic, right? I mean, that was the.
Well, it
what
was
it?
bile and vinegar. It was bile and vinegar.
Oh, it was myrrh in the one. No, in the one account, it's myrrh, which has an analgesic effect. Yeah. So
yeah, sure.
What was I going to say about this? Oh, this is part of the reason why we don't actually know what death is, because we don't witness it. We don't see it.
We know
we
we know
don't
the pain of death, but we don't know death.
I don't even know if we know the pain because of the narcotics. So,
well, you're saying in that sense, in a medicinal, therapeutic sense, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
We don't actually hear people crying out in suffering and pain because you go to the hospital anymore and it's just they're just drooling on the bed.
Oh no! Again, 3 years in a row, I was in an ER. They wanted to put me in that cocktail: Dilaudid, Ativan, and morphine. And it's very tempting because it's delicious. Whether you're an opiate addict or not, it's a delicious cocktail, and it makes you feel no pain. But the tsunami, this tsunamic wave of culture says all pain is bad, and people who cause you pain are bad people.
Can we talk about the pain in childbirth as men? Can we talk about that? And epidurals?
Well, again, go listen to Mary Harrington talk about, well, if men want to get uteruses installed, where are we going to get the uteruses from? It's a whole industry. It's consumer bit driven.
It's insane. It's totally insane.
It is. It's the same marketplace. It's the same economy as in the 18th and 19th century when wealthy women hired, well, actually Paris Hilton, she's paying someone to have babies for her with her eggs, right? She's having her eggs put in another woman's body. Yeah, because she doesn't want to go through that. Well, they've been doing this forever.
Yeah.
So this is just the next step in the transhumanist movement. And we don't need to go down that rabbit hole because we'll be there for an hour. But the point is then that
but you have no pain then.
So life in the midst of death. Yes.
Right. Yes. Okay.
Right. Again, so you know this and you've gone through this yourself, so you can understand this. And anyone who has gone through this will understand. And for those of you who don't, just forgive me. I would murder a human being to protect my child. Without question, I would murder you to protect my child. Because I've sat in a children's hospital with his head cut open and his brain there.
Right.
And that kind of trauma obviously never leaves you. And my 13-year-old,
but it's binding, right? I mean, it binds
that's
you
what I'm
to
saying.
them
It's like it
you
binds you
suffered
to
with
them in a way.
Yeah.
Because it's like you love them already as a parent. Like you love them unconditionally as a parent, despite everything. You're already tethered. But then to raise it to the level of like, well, he's probably going to die. So you might as well say your goodbyes, or, we can't do anything with him. We just got to hope. Like that level of binding, again, we're walking on the liminal edge of the earthly coveting of a temporary object, which should not be the source of your faith and belief and hope. And yet the one who is saying to you, I got this, right? And so like Habakkuk's saying, like in the midst of my years, in the midst of death, in the midst of suffering, you're with me. But then simultaneously we're saying, however, if you could make everything better and then just recede into the background for a while so I can enjoy my life with my child, awesome. Right. And we experience these, whether it's the closing of a church, whether it's the loss of a job, a career, a divorce, after a long-term marriage, losing your house, like we talked about last week with, disaster strikes your house. The pull to covet that, to put our faith in the temporary versus the permanent, it's not modernity that's caused us. Because again, go back to Cain and Abel, go back to Exodus, go back to Israel after the dispersion. It's human nature. That's the nature of the fall. And even if you deny quote unquote original sin as like the origin of sin being the fall of the man and woman at the tree, like we just keep repeating it over and over again. So even if you want to deny the original sin,
it at least it is a story that repeats itself. Yes.
Right. It is the reason we talk in the catechism about daily drowning and being put to death is because every single day I just reenact the first sin. I just keep doing it.
Or the flood, right? Or what led to the flood. Yeah.
Or or Babel. But there's the three, right? Again, eating, killing, and then the tower. And every day I eat the fruit of the tree, but it's not literal fruit. It's not an actual apple. It's my child, or it's my marriage, or it's my church, or whatever it might be, right? Because that's my hubris. That's my pride, my conceit is, but without this, Lord, what am I? Without this, what are you, more importantly? And when you when the bottom drops out on that, and you then say, again, Lord Jesus Christ, Lamb of God, have mercy on me, a sinner, you're praying against yourself. And likewise saying, in your mercy, you'll take care of this. You're praying against yourself every time you pray. I mean, it's thy will, not my will. And that'll kill you. Quite literally, that will kill you, because self-sacrifice and bearing one's cross for the other is the least of, again, like I've said before, if you don't try to talk people out of getting baptized in a very sober, like, this is the facts. Like, if I baptize you and you go through with this, your life is going to get worse. Your life is like, people are going to look at you and say, oh, I'm so sorry you're a Christian now. Oh, you go to that church and you're baptized. Oh, they're going to do that. They're going to treat you as a pitiable character. And yet in heaven, God sets you next to angels.
I have people that I'm in conversation with and have been for months, that they implicitly know that once they cross that threshold, everything changes. And so it's like, I know you say you're a Christian, and this is what Jesus says to do, and these are the promises he gives you, and they're like, but I'm like, well, I understand, actually. Right. I haven't known a life not as baptized, but but I know what I experience as a baptized person. So yeah.
Fear and reverence is what we're talking about. This is what this is. Healthy fear, but also reverence. Yeah. So then Luther says, this is the report that causes you to be feared and revered. It is said of you, and the histories also attest to this, that you are this strange God. There it is. Who helps in the midst of need. This, you want to call it a paradox, you want to call it a mystery. You are a strange God. We called it wild. Same thing. Strange.
Yeah.
Other.
Yeah.
And I think this is important when I listen to either people who've come back into the church after being absent for decades or are new, is the fact that they say, the whole reason that I came to believe that Jesus is God after going through Buddhism or being a Wiccan or going through Judaism or just, general paganism, is because the God of the Bible is so strange. He's not like other gods.
Well,
and that's what I said when I became a Christian. Yeah.
You just said it. All those other ones that you mentioned, I would say every other religion.
Yeah, of course.
Always, they all, the God or gods that are there are a reflection of yourself.
Right.
Whereas when you come to that, what God does is he takes you and he makes you a reflection of him. Right. Which is,
why those other gods are a reflection of you?
Because you made them?
Again, because they're real. And in order for you to take them in, because remember, they're parasites. They're fallen angels. Yeah. They're spirits that don't have bodies, and they desperately need to be in a body. They appear...
even if they came on a UFO?
There are people that I care for as a pastor who claim that their dead spouse haunts them.
Yeah.
And I say to them, have they ever talked to you? And when they talk to you...
Or what did they say? What did they say?
And some have claimed that they do talk to you, and I say, well, what did they claim, right? And it's always, I can help you with this thing. And then at a certain point, they stop talking. And I say, well, that's not your spouse. Well, how can you say that? Your spouse is with Jesus in the resurrection. And Jesus would never send your spouse back here, ever. We're all moving towards the resurrection. So I want you to say to that person who is in your house, in the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to go home. And I want you to keep saying it until they disappear, because that is not your spouse. And they want it to be their spouse because, of course, I love that person. I've been married to that person for decades. Children with this person, grandkids, great-grandkids. We built a life together. I'm tethered. I'm anchored to that person, this temporary thing. And yet, when I say that, they then say, thank you, because I thought I was going crazy. Because my kids, my grandkids, and our people are like, well, that's not true. That can't possibly be true. Your spouse is definitely not there. And then I'm like, oh, no, there's definitely someone there. There's definitely a spirit in the room with you. And it is definitely asking you to let it in. So those gods, they're appealing to you because they're parasitic. And they can't inhabit your room. They can't inhabit your house. They can't inhabit your life without your permission. You have to welcome them in. This is where the myth of the vampire comes from.
Sure.
Again, read the Old Testament. You build the altar. You put the body on the altar. The priest then says, I invite you in. I accept you. I assume you into my body. I give you.
That's Saul. That's Saul with the witch at Endor, right? He goes to her. Yeah.
Right.
And he asks for Samuel, right?
Right.
And she gives him something like Samuel. I mean, I don't. That's a strange story, I suppose, but it's there.
But above
it's a parasite
all
of
those
Samuel.
gods, then, is the one God, this strange God who comes and says, I'm going to take control of you. And I'm not going to ask for your permission. Because I'm embodied. I'm going to embody myself, not only in you, but I'm going to embody myself in the world. Like, I'm going to send you preachers. I'll be in the showbread. I'll be in the blood on the altar. So this is the thing that we always forget, is that the atheists aren't wrong when they say that Christians say the same things as other religions. We do. There's blood, there's water, there's altars, there's rites, there's gods, there's angels, there's demons. All this stuff is there because they stole it from us. But the one thing that they can never steal is, this is God embodied in the flesh. This is why people say, well, why do you always talk about Jesus in the Old Testament? Because the embodiment of God is the only thing that distinguishes us from pagans.
That he is with us, actually.
That he is with us always to the end of the ages, and he's crucified from the foundation of the world.
And that's where I was going to go. He's with us.
Yes.
Thou rememberest mercy, as he says here, right? As
like Odin hung himself from a tree. He did that. He was pierced with a spear, which they stole from the Christians. But we don't, that's, again, revisionist history. But the point is, even if we take it at face value that Odin hung himself from a tree, just like Jesus, was pierced just like Jesus, the difference is this. Jesus came back from the dead. And unlike Odin, doesn't go away. He says, I will be with you always to the end of the ages. Ages unto ages.
Well, and you can't say of Odin that he works all things together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose.
Can't. No. He'll do good things for you if you make the right sacrifice.
Right, but what you meant for evil, God meant for good. I mean, I don't know that you can say that.
If I offer, because if I'm Cain and I offer Odin a sacrifice of Cain, my whole herd might die. Right? Like, there's signs. There will be signs. Versus God says to Joseph, what your family intended for evil, I intended for good. You're like, how's that even humanly possible? Because I am not controlled by you. You don't get to invent me.
But it's funny. Yeah. It's funny the way you said that, because I mean, the only way that Joseph could say that about his brothers, I mean, what's incredible is not God saying that to Joseph. What's incredible is that Joseph could say that to his brothers and actually believe it, right?
And
that
Joseph does all this by hiding his divining chalice in the bag of his brother.
I know.
So even Joseph is playing diviner over in the corner, Nachash, trying to engage in divination. And God's like, yeah, I understand. You're an Egyptian now. You've gone native. I don't care.
You've gone over.
You've gone over.
Egyptian.
And
if that stuff isn't real. I mean, this is, because you mentioned this with the hearing your dead relative speak to you. And the temptation is to say none of that's real and it's just in your head. And to make it non-spiritual, right?
Yeah.
It's like, no, the spirit, this is the biblical cosmology. No, there is spiritual reality and it is at work, and it's not always, I mean, it's always under God, but it's not always, for faith, right? It may be actually a test of faith or a trial or tribulation or a lie.
Also, I'll leave a third of the angels to test you. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And also, we have stopped pronouncing to others, my God kills gods. There is a long tradition. There's a pattern of reality in the Bible. My God loves to kill other gods.
God sits in the heavens and laughs. I love that line.
So if you want to test my God with your God, I am more than happy to erect an altar. Douse it with water if you want. I don't care. Get the wood good and wet. I will call down lightning from the sky. My God told me to preach to bones.
Well, and the confidence that Elijah has there, without actually, at least not explicitly given some kind of word, he's just like, no, I'm not worried about it. I can do this.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So here's the line from the psalm we've been praying this week, right? The Lord brings the counsel of the nations to nothing. He makes the plans of the peoples of no effect. And I was thinking about that. I'm like, so we complained years ago about the globalists and the big agenda and the New World Order and the World Economic Forums and all these sorts of things. And then I'm like, Jesus has a word for you. He makes the plans of the peoples of no effect. It's of no effect. It's like they can plan, they can scheme, they can pass their stupid laws or whatever.
Right.
And here's where your confidence lies, is that God sees it all and he knows. And what's the last word he gives? It's a beautiful word. Let your mercy, O Lord, be upon us just as we hope in you. It's like, oh, okay. What am I worried about? I don't know what I was worried about.
What are you going to do?
No,
This
I
is
mean,
always
we can
the
certainly
question, right?
Yeah, or when are you going to do it, right? Lord, oh Lord, how long, oh Lord?
Is that, it's ayin, isn't it? Ayin? To be nothing, to be no man. Ayin in Hebrew.
Good question.
Aleph, Yod, Nu, I think. Ayin.
That sounds right.
Yeah.
You know more Hebrew than I do.
You are not. I guess the way to, in a Hebrew way, you are uncreated. It's Jesus saying, woe to you Pharisees. That is, it would have been better that you never be born. Like, I'm going to uncreate you.
Yeah, that you were not. Right.
And that's
same
a strange God.
Yeah. Well, and the same thing with it bothers people with Judas and the way that Jesus speaks to Judas.
Yeah. Do what you got to do. So yeah, I just think that we need to emphasize the strangeness of God much more. I think it's a good thing, actually, because it sets you free from saying things like, well, we just can't understand God's will. Sure we can, if we look to Jesus.
and listen to what he says. Yes.
And listen to what he says. And
the problem isn't that we don't know God's will. It's that we don't actually want his will to be done often.
And ultimately, his will is a mystery. Even when it's revealed to us in Christ, if you really just sit down with it and say, so you're the resurrection and the life, and anyone who trusts in me, even though he dies, will not die.
Right. But that's the particularity. I mean, imagine like you're in a gulag in Soviet Russia, and you're like, well, I know that you're going to end this. I don't know how. I mean, maybe for me it's going to be in death.
Right.
Right. How long is this?
Today.
And right. So then you can pray thy will be done, and also come quickly. Right. I mean. Yeah. But not my will, but your will be done. Right.
Right. Yeah. You lay low and build. You kill when you wish to impart life. 1 Samuel 2:6. Song of Hannah. This is one that is in the liturgy. Or in the canon, right? It's not a part of our lectionary readings, I don't think.
Is it?
It's so good.
Maybe.
You want to
the Song of Hannah? Yeah. You have to do the feast day, I think. What feast day does it come on?
So
one of the Mary days.
Fall in particular. Yeah. Yeah. This has haunted me ever since I first read it, because I love it with all my heart, and yet it's terrifying. Yeah. You permit things to break apart when you want to build. You kill when you want to impart life. Yeah. Good luck with that whole, I'm not going to suffer or experience pain because I'm a Christian believer. You can, as long as you ignore everything. You do not do as the world does. There it is. You do not do as the world does, which fends off evil in the very beginning or remains stuck in it completely. Like I said at the beginning of the show, if you just take this with you, just this small volume, like just this one paragraph is enough for an entire plane trip to just sit on it and meditate on the depth of what's being said here. No, you let us sink into the midst of suffering, and yet you pull us out again. You want to give us the Christ's kingdom, and at the same time, you have us driven into Babylon, into the pit of servitude. Oh, and yet you do not leave us there. There is the pattern you follow in all your works. That is your method. That is what is sung, heard, and said of you, namely, that you are indeed a God to be feared and honored and praised greatly in such works.
Giving you Christ's kingdom in the midst of slavery in Babylon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's the quiet confidence you see in Daniel, right? I mean, he's like, oh, I can't pray. Sorry. I'm going to pray more. And I'm going to do it with my windows open now so you can see me. Right. Like, what? Okay.
Very unpopular thinkers in America today. I was listening to someone talk last night, Thomas Sowell. Never has the black community been more united, more church-going and religious, and more united than in the early 20th century. Over 96% of all homes, two-parent houses.
Yeah. And
elderly people could walk down the street
at
night and never fear being robbed. You never heard gunshots during the day. Never. Churches were full. Families were united. Communities were strongest. When discrimination against black people was also strongest. So he asked the question, Sol asked this question, and Chad Jackson, who's a recent thinker, what
Ouch.
happened to turn the community, the black community as a whole, as a kind of general block of people, what happened in the 60s and 70s to turn that entire community against itself?
Civil rights movement?
He says it's success
Oh,
and a lack of discrimination.
yeah.
Because there's no counterforce. There's
yeah,
no,
so
okay,
you've heard...
when Israel is at its strongest under Solomon, it is the
Right.
most tempted to apostatize, and it does. But
Right.
when they're dispersed, that is when the children cry out, what's happened, right?
And then
Without
they return. Yeah.
And then they return. We pray for good times. This is the old trope, right? Hard times make hard men. Hard men make easy times.
Solzhenitsyn, right? Wasn't it?
Could be.
Or
Originally?
I think
Was that
so.
him
Yeah.
originally? Somebody
Yeah,
in
the
live stream.
quadrant, the 4-quadrant. Yeah.
Yeah. This is the hard truth, is that when your church is suffering and you are struggling to make the bills and there are a lack of people in church, you are strongest. Because who are you going to turn to then? There's no one to pay the bills. There's no one, no one's coming. Like, who do you talk to? You turn to God, because what else are you going to do? And yet, what do you do when it's full and the bills are paid and you've got savings in the tens of thousands of dollars and you got all these plans and everything is just great, so to speak, good? Well, God has richly blessed us. So let's talk about our blessings. Let's talk about our success. Let's talk about how full we are. Let's talk about our programs. And again, it's not an either or, but it's rather to say, to Habakkuk's point, to Luther's point, if the hounds of hell are not baying at your pulpit when you're preaching, you should be worried. Because the devil doesn't care about those who don't preach the gospel. He leaves them alone.
So the quote comes from Mr. Howe. Yes, from the Fourth Turning book, because it has those four steps.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So it's the Fourth Turning. What I was thinking of, this has been the critique of DEI and some of this other kind of woke, is that the destruction of merit. But the thing with merit is that you have to struggle to earn, right? And you think of like,
get rid of it.
which is why you get rid of it. So I was thinking of like who was the peanut guy? Who was
Peanuts
the
or
horticulturalist? No, the horticulturalist guy.
Oh, Carver?
Carver, right?
Yeah, Carver.
Or you think of
George Washington Carver.
the thing that I've never gotten in my head is like, how do you end up debating Abraham Lincoln, in national-wide tours as an African American? It's like it's through struggle. I mean, he had to work really hard. He wasn't a privileged person to get to that point, right?
Yeah. I just realized that DEI is the secular extension of the prosperity gospel.
Of course it is. Oh no, they just they ape our worst ideas. Of course.
Yes, of course. We've talked about this with the Enlightenment. We've talked about this. Yeah, it's the church sets it in the river, puts it in the basket, floats it down the river, and then Pharaoh's daughter picks it up and goes, "This is good. I can raise this. I can live with this. I'll call this my own." So back to the paragraph that we're still stuck on. You want to give us the Christ kingdom, and at the same time, you've driven us into Babylon. Which, by the way, for Christians in the United States, stop complaining then that everything's gone to hell in a handbasket. Because according to Habakkuk, that means that God's right there, ready to make life. He's just winnowing right now, cleaning the ground.
Right, and just like the Egyptians, so he did with Babylon. Like we plundered them.
Yeah. Yeah.
God gave over. Yeah.
You did not leave us there, he concludes. That is the pattern. Oh, look at him use the word pattern. That is the pattern you follow in all your works. That is your method. That is what is sung, heard, and said of you, namely, that you are indeed a God to be feared and honored and praised greatly in such works. You want to talk about patterns of reality? Well, Luther just names one for you right there. Here's a pattern. The text is obscure here. That is to say, it is very Hebrew. So as a German, as a Saxon, he's saying, as a Saxon, this is difficult to grasp, to comprehend, because this is a very Hebrew thing to say.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder if he actually likes Hebrew or if he just is arguing with Hebrew all the time as a Hebrew scholar.
Yes.
Right?
Yes and yes, I think. Yes, right?
Yeah.
Therefore, many have tripped over this very Hebraism. To impart life to the work, means nothing but to help in time of need. For to be in need is practically the same as to be in death. Yeah.
Yeah.
To be in need
good.
is the same as to be in death.
Well, it's like it's a sign of death. Yeah.
It's time, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The world has been turned upside down. And when a person is helped, he feels as though he had been made alive and born anew. That is, the kayak flipped back over, and now I'm on top of the water.
Raised to life again. Yeah.
It symbolizes that God does not appear as soon as the need begins. There we go. And as though
you skipped a line. You skipped an important line there.
Did I?
In the midst of the years.
In the midst of the years expresses as much as at the right time. There we go.
Yeah, that's Galatians 3, is it, right? When the time was right.
Yes, at the right time. Kairos.
When the fullness of time had come, God sent forth the Son. Yeah.
It symbolizes then, again, when a person is helped, he feels as though he has been made alive and born anew. In the midst of the years expresses as much as at the right time. It symbolizes that God does not appear as soon as the need begins, as though any time were the right time. Well, that's contrary to the commercial.
It is.
Miller beer. Nor does help remain away forever, as though every time for helping has passed. But he comes in the midst of time. That is, he knows how to follow a middle course, so that he does not help too soon, and also not... Is this Gandalf talking now? Like, a wizard is never early or late. What's going on?
True. Well, there's wisdom there, isn't there?
Yeah. He is never too early, and he is never too late.
Yes.
He arrives precisely when he needs to. For if he would help too soon, we would not learn to despair of ourselves, but would remain arrogant. There it is, pride. If he would be too tardy with his help, we would not learn to believe, but would despair and become hopeless of him. But now that he adopts a middle course between pride, arrogance, and despair, hopelessness, he also holds us in the middle between pride and hopelessness. Would you say that's humility? That's fear and reverence?
I don't know. It's just constantly uncomfortable.
Yes, there is that. Yes. How do you feel? Super uncomfortable. Why? Because I'm in between the two.
Right. It's like, I want to be comfortable, or I don't want to be so uncomfortable. And so I'm just kind of, or discomforted.
It's Goldilocks
so I'm just
syndrome,
uncomfortable.
Right?
Yeah. Not too hot, too cold. Right.
Yes. In Hebrew, in the midst of the years does not imply that something constituted the beginning and something the end. That would be Jesus. It means intra veil inter annos id est suo tempore. That is, he chooses the hour for his help from among the years or within the time. Just as this is cosmic. This is fantastic.
This is fantastic. Yeah, this is fantastic.
Just as I say that the sun is among the stars, not exactly in the middle of the stars, but mingled among the other stars, so the hour of help is also in the midst of the years, that is, among the years or amid the time, so that he will not let all the years come to an end and forsake us eternally until no more years are left. Oof.
This reminds me of a man that I had. He was 80-something when I first met him, and he was he had all sorts of issues, but he did ask me this question. He's like, I was gone from the church for 40 years, and then I came back after my wife died. And why did the Lord take his time with me? You know?
Yeah, right, right.
He's like, well, and then what brought me back? I'm like, your baptism.
Here's your answer.
He's like, yeah. It's like, no, it wasn't. The time wasn't right. And part of his grief in that is like, well, why didn't he call me back while my wife was still alive, right? So that he could have brought her back. I was like, well, that's not your call.
Right, because he wants her more than you do. And that's the highest good.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, that's what, again, we go back to the mirror and the door symbolism, is that's what you are to him. You're that open door of the resurrection that says your wife is on the other side of the wardrobe right now. And you'll get to go through the door too, but not yet.
And, there's that, it's kind of a trope, or maybe it's a little pedantic, but people say, well, I can't wait to, Well, I don't want to use the O.J. Simpson one. I got to think of a different example. But like, the memes, you get to heaven and are like, oh, now I understand, right?
Yeah, right.
There were some O.J. Simpson ones this week, which were kind of funny. But, that idea that like, I can't understand the wisdom of what God's doing here now. And I can't even necessarily understand what he did in the past. But I know that he will reveal this all to me, that the wonderful wovenness of his will throughout everything in my life. Will be revealed to me finally in the resurrection. Yeah.
Well, I think we forget too.
It's not
I
pedantic.
This last
it's good.
Week. No, it's not pedantic. It's the mystery. It's giving way to the mystery. I said this either last week or the week before, but I said to a woman after her husband's funeral about her prayer, I said, you don't know what you're praying for. I know why you're praying it, and I think it's beautiful, and it's good, and it's a faithful prayer. But you don't know what you're understanding for, because if you did, you wouldn't ask for it. That's the point. Like, we ask for things because we think, I need this. So it's like, you don't want her to come back. You want to go through. You're looking the wrong direction at these things. Mm-hmm. It's not that you want your wife to come back to you. It's that you want to go through it to her. But the problem is, so to speak, a holy heavenly problem is, once you go through that door, through the back of the wardrobe, you will be swallowed up by the mystery of Christ, and it will no longer matter to you because it will be a wonder. Again, going back to being a child, I think this is why I'm beating on this. Maybe I'm going through a midlife crisis theologically. I don't know. But is that
now that you say it? Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that again, growing up the way that I did? Yes, it was bad, but it was also great. And now that I'm getting older, I'm seeing the greatness more than the badness, right? Because when I say that, what I mean autobiographically is when I was younger, I only focused on inside my house, and almost to the exclusion of anything else. It was like monomaniacal. As I get older, I start focusing on around my house, outside, and broadening out. And so when I say like God hunted me, for example, started hunting me when I was 23, I was so afraid of him that I ran away to Mexico from Minnesota. And then I got to Mexico and he was there. So I ran away to Portland, Oregon. And then he got me there. So I ran back home to Minnesota. I ran in a giant circle, literally. And then I got home and I said, you can't have me. He said, well, actually, you're exactly where I wanted you to start from. And now that I have you here, let's put you in seminary. And I'm like, I am absolutely not going to do that. And so I ran away from it.
I'm not seminary material. I don't know what you're talking about.
And the seminary made it clear to me, you are not seminary material. Right? And then here I am. And then I said, well, I'm not going to be a pastor. So I ran away from ministry for 10 years, literally. And then I'm not pastor material. And the Synod agreed and said, you are not pastor material. And here I am 16 years later. And so for the nomad, I've been a nomad my whole life. We moved every 4 years when I was growing up. My wife and I moved 10 times in 12 years or 12 times in 10 years, whatever it was at one point, because of seminary and everything else. Like, I'm a nomad by nature. And yet I've been in the same place now for 16 years. And not surprisingly, it's because of the church that's held me down. Like, that's my anchor, right? The church, Big C church, but also my congregation I serve. So God chased me literally thousands of miles across the earth. I had my own Jonah moment where I ran to Tarshish. And then when I got back, he goes, are we good? And I'm like, no, I'm not good yet. He's like, well, you can keep doing this. Right. And again, it's the sheep shepherd thing. It's like, no, you're not in control of this. You're not guiding your fate. You're not guiding your destiny here. There's no control. But God says, not yet, not yet, not yet, now. And as soon as the now happens, you're in that middle path, like he says here. And that middle path is between the fear of, oh my God, I can't believe all the things that I see over my shoulder now, and the reverence for, thank you, God, that I made it this far, right? Yeah. Like you said. And so the mystery of that in this life is almost incomprehensible and crushing. Imagine what it'd be like if he actually showed up. Like Martin Shaw says, at the end of Job, God pulls back the veil just enough for Job to catch just a sliver of what's going on behind the veil. And Job's response to it is complete awe. He just, absolute silence. Because he sees behind the veil, and he sees God playing with Leviathan. He sees Christ. And just like Adam, his response is no response. There's nothing to say at this point. It's like Thomas. What do you say when God shows up and says, go ahead and stick your hand in me? And you do. Like there's no coming back from that. And we know what happened to Thomas.
That's
right?
just my Lord, my God, right? That's it.
Yeah, that's
then,
all you got.
Then go off to India.
Yeah, right. Run, Thomas, run. And so in the midst of the years, and the way that Luther says, this is a Hebraism, I don't understand it, is so beautiful. Because like I said, he's at the height of his intellectual prowess right now. People are coming literally from everywhere to listen to him teach. And he's saying, this is so beyond us. And yet all he's saying is this little simple thing.
Right, but this is also the time of the really probably the greatest potential for fear of, the Roman Empire. And I mean, we're getting close to war. There's the threat of war. They're not going to take this sitting down,
right,
or laying down, right? And yet he's in the midst of that tribulation, that trial, right? Yeah, and the threat of death and all of that, and yet look at what it sparks, right? Look at what it brings. Right. It's like what's the other picture they use? Like a refiner's fire, right? That's the other picture,
right?
Burning off the chaff, right?
I'm not going to spare you from going into the furnace, but I will pull you out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. He says in the midst of the years and not in the midst of the days, because he is speaking from the heart of those in need. For them, a day is as long as a year. When time ceases and eternity takes over, right? Like in the liturgy, what is time? It is nothing. Years go by. Indeed, every period of time is long for them. He uses the phrase also because a year is the longest measure of time. Through summer and winter, the world always becomes new again in a year, and thus year is added to year. By the years, we compute the length of time in this way. Quote, Lord, you help among the years, that is, in the course of time. When the time seems so long to us, you will appear in the course of that time. Unquote. He speaks about many years because he speaks about many miracles and works of God, each of which is performed in its time and in its year, making the years as many as the works. In his works, he always arranges to come within the year's needs, that is, in the course of the need. To impart life and to make known are practically identical, except that the former means to perform the miracle and to provide help, whereas the latter means that this is also felt and that it affords pleasure. In the Hebrew, the words in tribulation read in turbatione, that is also in the midst of need. When worst comes to worst, when fear and trepidation are greatest, then, he says, you remember mercy. Then you help. Now, whoever wants to be saved must learn to know you thus. This is comforting to believers, but unbearable for the ungodly. Well, welcome to Transhumanism 101. Here it is.
Yeah, they can't
Holy
even
crap.
Death, right? Yeah,
no, you have to be a Gnostic. Again, meat Lego Gnostics. You have to be a meat Lego. Like just mix and match parts. Break a part off, add another part. They're kind of.
Well, I kind of laugh about that with our older folks, I'm like, so how many replacement parts is this now for you? Well, that's my second knee. I'm like,
yeah.
In one sense, it's like, oh, this is beautiful that we can prolong life this way, but maybe it is. I don't know. You get to experience generations.
There's a distinction between a need, that is, you're not going to walk anymore because you're 60 and you need a new hip.
Which would lead to death, ultimately.
Or you're 23, you do not need a breast implant. You don't. You don't need liposuction. You don't need butt lifts. You don't need these things. You're 23. You want them because you think in terms of consumerism and product placement. And you think of your body as a part of that.
So I had two thoughts on that. Because the first was this comment that the longest span of life, that at least the longest span of time noted is a year. But a year still works because a year is still cyclical. That's one of Luther's things, right? It comes, the year changes over, and you have the seasons.
He's still thinking in the Gregorian sense, not the Julian sense or anything else.
Okay. Well, I don't know about that. But in any case,
Gregorian calendar. I'm just trying to frame it.
It could be the Hebrew sense. It could just be the Hebrew sense. That's fine. But we do this. We're not even like the Asians. The Asian cultures are even longer term, right? They're 100-year, 200-year, 1,000-year. They're thinking very, very long term. We do decades, though. We think in terms of decades and millennia and hundreds of years, maybe.
I think in
although our
terms of
country's
the other
pretty young.
day, 5 years ago, and 20 years ago, because that's where I'm at
Okay.
in my life.
Right, but I think what Luther's getting after is, and maybe the scripture is too, is that that's too far of a horizon. You really, there's
Yeah.
not much benefit in thinking. I mean, think about like what's the difference as far as exile from somebody coming out of exile? Had they been in Egypt for 400 years, or they had been, or 430, or
Yeah.
they'd been in Babylon for 70? Like, effectively, we've been here forever at that point.
Well, read like the Gulag Archipelago as an example. Every day is the same. Every day is gray. Every day we do the exact same thing. When I do prison
cold.
ministry, that's what they say too. Every day is the same day.
The food's the same. The threat of
And
death's
by the way,
same.
actually, we talked about this in the Bard episode. The worst thing that you can do as a prisoner is to live with hope. It will crush you because you're told you're going to do 3 years. Well, you might get let out early. You might have it extended. Something might happen today in the commissary that you get time added to your sentence. If you start living according to a calendar, you will go insane. Everyone says that has any time in. Even my brother, who served 3.5 of 5 years, says you can't afford to live with hope, even if you've only been in 3 years. Only.
But that's the same. The same in the hospital.
Yeah.
I found that in the hospital. I mean, some people
My
they're
brother
really
is
anxious
10
to
years
get out.
younger than me. He looks like he's 20 years older than me now after being in jail for 3.5 years.
So he actually aged faster.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's what, to your point. Like it's all just, it's rubbery. Time is rubbery.
But you do this when you go to the hospital and just out of curiosity, like what day is it? And they don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you
that's
can't
the
know,
worst,
'cause
right? When
otherwise-
you're in the hospital.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Well, because you start marking the days, then you become impatient,
yeah. Yes.
right?
No, it's
So that was one idea, and then I think the other thing is like we were talking about, God in His time, accomplishing it, and the man who measured his life, and he determined the value of those 40 years, right?
Yeah.
Now that's not how God values that time. He doesn't value it the way that we do.
now we're back at the mirror.
And I think it's mirror or it's materialistic, right? It's like, time is your most valuable asset. You've heard this before. People talk this way even in church.
Yeah,
you
of
only have
course.
168 hours a week. I'm like, I cannot think in those terms. I can't think about like how much time I have or don't have, because it doesn't give
why do you
you.
think-
It makes you so momentary. It
Well,
doesn't
it
make
gives
you
you
momentary. It's the
anxiety.
opposite.
And depression.
Oh, I heard a great definition of anxiety. Have you heard this one?
What's that?
It's when you're a conspiracy theorist about yourself.
Sure.
That's what
Yeah.
you're telling conspiracy theories about yourself.
Yeah.
It makes you anxious. Yeah. But in any case, right. I don't want to live that way. I don't want to live that way in liturgy, especially as
Yeah.
you mentioned, right? Why are we looking at our clocks and watches and what's the point? What are you in a hurry for? Where do you have to go? I always say this to people and they look at me cross-eyed because of course they have a whole list of things that they're planning to do as soon as they get out of church.
Yeah.
Like, well, what better thing do you have to do? I mean, that would be a materialistic way to say it, I suppose.
Well, we experience this all the time when church goes longer than 60 minutes.
Mine always does.
Pastor
so I don't
Church
have
went
that
long
problem.
last week. And long compared to what? Eternity? Pastor, you know what I'm saying. I'm like, well, what were you late for? Well, I had brunch plans at noon. I'm like, we were done at 11:15. You live 3 minutes from the church. Well, I have to go home and change. Why? Time.
All of it. And it does drive us kind of crazy, people who can't keep appointments on time, right? Because they're like, I had my schedule planned out. I expected you at this time and you didn't show up on time. It's like back to Gandalf or to Jesus, right?
Yeah.
It's like no one knows the day or the hour. Like,
Right.
why are you counting time that way? It is an interesting idea. Because maybe it is, like you said, materialistic or mirror, like, and we're always just like the span of the life.
Materialism is. Materialism in a symbolic sense is the mirror, mirror on the wall. Who's the richest? Who's the most famous? Who's the most popular? It's FOMO. If you're missing out, it's just mirror on the wall. That's all it
Okay.
is.
All right.
Right. This is why we love when we see unfiltered pictures of Kim Kardashian, for example. Right. We want to see her ugliness to prove that she's human. Right. And yet I saw how much she's paid per Instagram post, and I was just like, wow, okay.
By
I can't
who?
believe you get whoever's, exactly. Like, who is paying you just to post pictures of your butt or whatever? And it's like, even though we know, like, we've seen unphotoshopped pictures of her, we've seen rich people, outside their element where they're exposed by whatever it might be. it's a mirror. And
Yeah.
it goes back to what we said at the very beginning, which is once you hold that mirror up and that door opens, as he says at the end, either the door that opens up is comforting to you as a believer, or the door that opens up is unbearable for the ungodly. Because
I
either
did see Mick
monsters are
Jagger
coming
doing
out
his
or you're going
dance
in.
routines. Have you seen those?
Yeah.
Mick Jagger doing his
Yeah.
dance routines? Like,
Yeah.
how is he doing that at 80? I don't know.
Because he does yoga 3 hours a day and runs on the treadmill every day. Now, I've listened to
Does
him in
he?
interviews talk about his exercise routine. And he goes to Switzerland at least once a year.
For stuff.
Blood transfusions and other things, yeah. And other things, but blood transfusions and other things, yes. Whose blood? Well, that's a whole nother market economy. But there it is again, right? There's transhumanism. So when the door opens up, we talked about this in terms of like the cracks opening up from underneath and the monsters coming through the cracks and inhabiting the public square, which we see every day now. So when that opens up, again, it's comforting to us as believers because the door that opens up is that heavenly light. It's angels and archangels coming through and saying, the door to Eden is open to you. Jesus' death built the bridge between earth and heaven. It's open to you, right? The cherubim's out of the way. This flaming sword is done. It's been put away. But when the door opens up to the ungodly, that's when you beg God to close it.
It's
Because you're
unbearable.
overshadowed by his glory. Yeah. Yeah. Because it's literally going to burn you up. Again, refine you. Oh, that's the first verse of the song, by the way, folks. That's just Luther
Yeah.
in the first
Yeah.
verse.
Well, it goes a long way to explain why it's maybe just instinctual to avoid suffering, to avoid pain,
Yeah.
to avoid
To avoid the
difficulty,
door.
to not do the hard
Yeah.
thing, even if it's
Right.
the necessary thing.
Because the door is
Because-
Jesus and Jesus is the mirror, ultimately. That's the thing. And to put it in a law gospel context, Jesus is the mirror of the law who's asking the question, where you going? Right? Or to Mary, who are you looking for? Who are you looking for?
Mm-hmm.
Sir, if you know where Jesus is, if you know where my Lord is, tell me where you put him. Right? And Jesus is like, Mary. She's like, no, just tell me. He's like, Mary. She turns around. She goes, oh my God, it is you.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And so the mirror of the law, as we talk about in our tradition, it's not there to scare you away. It's Adam, where are you? That's the mirror of the law, right? Stop comparing yourself to the woman and look at me. I'm naked too. What's the problem?
Right.
Right?
But it is
we
painful.
can't look at the naked God. Of course, because we can't look at the naked God anymore. It's incomprehensible. We're dressed in skins. We're looking at each other through skins right now. That's what these computers and these,
So then he
these
clothes
technologies-
himself in skin then too for us.
Yeah, yeah.
For our
Again,
sakes.
why do we venerate and respect Mary? Because she gave her own flesh to skin to clothe God, just as he took skins from his creation to clothe the man and the woman. Like, that's a big deal. She sacrificed her life for him.
So it's not
God
just that
chose
Jesus
her to do
becomes
this.
like us, or he is one of us, or he is man.
Yeah.
But that's part of his humiliation, of course.
Right. Again, name another God who does this. None.
Well, it is always the Jesus point, isn't it?
Yes.
Where things start to get uncomfortable and not
The beginning
knowable.
and the end of the story are the two parts that separate Jesus from all the other gods. The birthing and the dying are the two things that separate him, because it's an actual physical bodily birth and an actual physical bodily death.
I know they try to come up with people that also rise from the dead, but I'm not so sure about those. Those
Not
seem
in the
to
body,
be.
they don't. Not in the
Yeah,
body.
they're
they
not
don't.
in the body. Yeah, or there's revisionism going on.
Yes.
Like,
A lot. The Horus
Yeah.
myth is the most famous one about historical revisionism.
how can we make
he's,
this
again,
be kind of like Jesus? Yeah.
I wrote this on the Easter, right? He's born a fugitive, lives as an outlaw, dies as a criminal, and then is raised from the dead and appears to his disciples. I'm like, that's wild, man. That's a wild God. That is strange. You find another God that has those, again, because it's not that he was born, it's that he's born a fugitive. And it's not that he lived and performed miracles, it's that he was an outlaw in his life. And it's not that he died like Odin died. Jesus died a criminal's death. And it's not that he was raised from the dead like other gods. It's that when he was raised from the dead, they fled from him in trauma and ecstasy, and he had to go find them
Over and
and
over.
reunite them, right?
8 days later, they're in the same room again, still locked behind closed doors. Oh, why was that?
Right.
They're still afraid.
So it's not that he was born, it's that he was born a fugitive. It's not that he lived, but that he lived as an outlaw. It's not that he died, but he died as a criminal. No other God can make this claim because no other God would lower themselves to be a fugitive or an outlaw or criminal. Like that's the scandal that Paul's talking about.
Yeah, the
right?
exchange.
The Jews,
yeah.
It's not that the Jews reject Paul's, like his Jewish brothers and sisters and friends and family reject Paul saying Jesus is the Messiah. The Messiah is not the problem in this story. The problem is the little adjectives that are attached to him. That's what they have a problem with.
Not even the rabbi part of it. Oh, you teach.
No,
they
of course not.
admire his teaching when he's 12 years old in the temple, right?
Yes.
Oh, he asks great questions. Look at him.
Yes.
He's so wise.
Right. No, it's that even in the temple, he's already functioning as an outlaw. Which is why he speaks with authority, by the way, too. That's a whole other thing, though. So now the second verse, God came from the south, and the Holy One from Mount Paran, Selah. Here he begins to portray the ancient miracles as on a tablet or cloth, one after the other. The first, when he led the people from Egypt through the wilderness into the land of Canaan. Canaan, who love their tselem, they love their little icons. Paran is the mountain range that borders on the land of Canaan on the south. When God broke in here, well, there it is again. When God broke in with the people of Israel, he came upon the Canaanites directly from the south and defeated them. I told you, our God hates other gods. The fact that, again, how can the maker of the thing fear the thing that he made? And how can the thing that he made claim to be equal to its maker? That's just silly. That's just
Let's see how this goes. Let's see how it goes.
Exactly. The fact that Israel marched out of Egypt and through so many nations and so many wildernesses and drove out so many peoples was as miraculous as their deliverance from Babylon. And yet this happened when the hour came. He should surely be used to it, that Scripture calls God the Holy One, that is, the one who is whole and set apart, complete. For wherever he is, he hallows through his Spirit. The meaning of Selah has been sufficiently explained elsewhere, especially in Psalm 68. Luther's Works 13, page 37, which again, Luther's Works 13 is really good too. 14 is better, but 13 is good. Just so you know, pick that one up too. His Psalms lectures are fantastic. Psalm 118.
Which ones? Not the early ones. Those are the later ones.
No, not the early ones. The early ones are nice to read in context because you can see him working his way out of, the monastic tradition. But volume 14, he's just... That's the Psalm 51, the penitential psalms. That's
right.
Like I said, 118, the Confentimony. That's the good stuff. That stuff will curl your toes. So that's verse 2. Thank God it's shorter than verse 1, but we actually already talked about all this.
Mm-hmm.
He broke in. He conquered the people. He marched them through Egypt, through the nations, through the wildernesses, plural, drove out the peoples. How is that not a sign? Semeion in Greek.
Mm-hmm.
Wherever he is, he makes that place holy through his Spirit. And Luther says this in the Catechism, right? The Holy Spirit is holy because he makes holy people. Because to say Holy Spirit is like, it's redundant. God is holiness. There's no such thing as God. God is holy because he I did this thing over here. It's really cool.
It's describing the performative work of the work. Spirit.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yep. He is what he does. He does what he is.
Well,
he can't do otherwise.
It's interesting you definitely get that with the Spirit. You get it some with Jesus too, but definitely with the Spirit, because you have him as the promise of my Father, right? Or the Comforter, or it's all these. It's very performative description.
Yes.
Or he's very grammatical. The Spirit is very, very much of grammar.
Yes. Right.
Yeah. Huh.
In a way, you could say the Spirit is the meaning of the word.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So his glory, then, verse 3. His glory covered the heavens, and the earth was full of his praise. That is to say, with such a work, he caused people to speak of him everywhere, in the countries under heaven. Here is another Hebrew obscurity. It reads, his glory covers the heavens, not above, but below. The Psalter also speaks about covering heaven with clouds. Habakkuk wants to say that God's praise resounded so fully everywhere under the heavens that if this praise had been clouds or fog, it would have covered the heavens. We speak of this as of covering the heavens from beneath. It is the same as when Moses says to Pharaoh in Exodus 9, verse 16, "For this purpose have I let you live, to show you my power, so that my name may be declared throughout all the earth." It is also characteristic of the Hebrew tongue to speak of heaven as of many heavens. For every country speaks of heaven as far as it can be surveyed by the eye in that country, as of its own heaven. That is why we say in the Lord's Prayer, "Who art in the heavens," that is, in all heavens to the end of the earth. Thus God's praise was in the heavens that were above these countries, and his glory was in whatever country his praise was. We could dedicate an entire episode on how we've tinkered with the words of the Lord's Prayer. That's a fun one.
Maybe. Well,
Don't
this
upset
is
the golden calf.
It's kind of, it seems to be a simple-minded kind of way of understanding God. It seems to be. I'm not saying it is. It does seem that way because the children respond that way. Well, he went away in the clouds, right, in his ascension, and then the answer is, and he'll come back in the way that he left. That's what the angels say. That he's going to come back on the clouds. Lo, he comes with clouds descending, as we say. I'm like, well, why clouds? Why heavens? And why, heavens above the heavens? We have the stars and planets, and that whole cosmology and that description is like, well, Jesus isn't up there in that cumulus cloud, right? I mean, that's the way the children respond to it all.
Right.
You're
right. He's not. He's much higher than that. He's at the very top of the heavens.
What is that?
The seventh circle. That's what happens when you don't have celestial spheres.
I know.
None of these things make sense. We don't have the right model.
What's his belt? What's his belt? What's the belt's name? Van Allen? Van Allen belt.
The Van Allen radiation belt?
Yeah. He's above that?
Yeah, of course. He's above all things.
Oh, as soon as I search for it, it says it's a myth. I'm like, what?
It's not the Van Allen radiation belt's a myth?
Well, they're saying that you can't go past it as a myth. Yeah, that you can't travel through it.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. Who are they? Them.
This is part of an article on heliophysics. Ooh, I like it.
There we go.
Let's go read here.
Yeah. No, it is as I sent that quote to you this morning, is as soon as you abandon the cosmology of the Bible for a modern materialist cosmology, nothing in the Bible makes sense. Literally nothing. None of it makes any sense whatsoever, except Jesus' moral teachings and the Old Testament's moral teachings. That's the only thing that makes sense. This is why people love to read Proverbs out of context.
Thank you, Thomas Jefferson.
Right. This is why people say, well, Proverbs is my favorite book. I'm like, why? Oh, because you're reading it as an instruction manual for how to live. I get it.
Well, I do think there's some wisdom that we've lost because we don't read it. I mean, in our tradition.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying you're only reading it from one perspective, though, and that's a very flat reality. Yeah. Right.
Well, it does describe a lot. It does describe a lot of lower things.
Reality materialistically. Yeah, of course it does. But you're not, again, it's not being covered by the higher heavenly things with meaning. So you're just reading it on a flat plane. And then again, you're turning to your neighbor and saying, like, how do I do this to him? It's like, you're missing the main point here. You're not in control. Wisdom is Christ, not you. You don't apply Christ to other people. Christ applies you. He embodies himself through you.
I guess you could always ask that question. You say, okay, here's this proverb. How does Christ bear witness to it in his own life, or in his speech, or in his behavior, or in his obedience to his father, or whatever? It depends on the proverb, I suppose. That's interesting. I'll have to try that.
It's the isness of everything. Again, God is love. If I love my wife, that's actually Christ.
Well, he says as much, doesn't he?
Well,
done unto the least of these, my brother.
It's not a metaphor. It doesn't symbolize. It's not pointing me to Jesus. It is him. The love of God is God's love. That is, it again, as I'm suffering because Christ suffers. I love because Christ loves. I can't, again, it's not a biochemical process in my body that causes me to love somebody. It's actually Jesus.
Well, this is the implication
right.
of saying that as Christians, by baptism, or whatever language you want to use there, that you are joined to Christ and you're part of his body. Right. Yeah. So then how could you rebel against the idea that your neighbor is Christ to you, right? Or you're Christ to them?
By
if you're
only
sharing,
seeing
if
your
you're
neighbor according to the flesh.
outside
Right.
of the reality that they are in Christ with you.
Right. Right.
And
You can
maybe
call it
it's just thinking of
materialism. Paul
Jesus
just calls it
too
being in the flesh.
small. I called it radical individualism, but maybe that sounds too abstract, probably.
No,
Like
it
you
is.
say,
It's
it's
just
just
seeing everything on a
fleshy.
flat plane. It's just flesh. It's just saying, well, my wife is just a unity of multiple different raw elements that make a body, and it just so happens that chemically, her pheromones and my pheromones are conjugal, and therefore we're married.
It
And
just
it's
so
like,
happened she
wow.
came together in her mother's womb,
Right.
right?
Yeah, after
just so
running away from
happened.
God for thousands of miles, I just happened to see her randomly. And like you said, if we want to trace it all the way back, there's the little thing about being born and having no knowledge of me before the age of 20, whatever she was when we met.
Yeah, it just so happened.
24, 23, whatever she was. Yeah, just so happened. There's the accident of history approach to things. Once again, something happened,
know.
and then a whole bunch of stuff exploded, and then some other things happened, and then some things got together and made the other things happen, and that's how
And
we
there was
got
a
here.
butterfly in there somewhere. You
Yeah,
know,
there's a butterfly in there. It's pretty. That's why I have a butterfly tattoo. I don't.
yeah, I mean, there is a way. I mean, I've mocked people who said, "Well, this person, God made this person for me," and all of that. Maybe in hindsight, you can say that. I think with more confidence.
Only in Christ.
In the moment,
Only in Christ.
yeah, only in Christ. Yeah.
Because outside of Christ, why would God put a cross on me?
Okay.
Versus, thank God God put this cross on me.
What are you saying? Marriage is
Because-
suffering? What's your problem?
To those who have never been married, what I just said is insane.
It always
Otherwise,
makes me
the
wonder
rest of
why
the congregation,
why do people outside of Christ get married? I don't even understand why they would do it. 'Cause how do you even bear it? I don't even know. Well, they don't. They just get
Right.
divorced and remarried willy-nilly,
Right.
I guess.
yeah, it's almost
All
as if that too is a product to be consumed and purchased and franchised.
right.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's ungodliness is consumerism, right? This is why somebody said
That was the
yesterday
thing
that,
with Paul King's whatever. I can't ever remember.
Kingsnorth, Paul Kingsnorth. Yeah.
King's
King's
North.
North,
Okay,
going
I'm gonna get it in
north
my
to the
head.
Kings.
King's North. Going north. Oh, he's from Ireland, right? Okay.
He is now.
That that he said capitalism was ungodly or something like that. And I was
No, he said psychology is the policeman of capitalism.
nah, that was a different lecture. No, it wasn't. It was the short one. It was the 40-minute one you sent me. Because he connected capitalism to the Enlightenment, and I was like, okay,
Yes.
I'll have to work on
Well,
this.
again, it's a natural outcome of materialism.
Right. So that's really the accusation. It's just thinking purely in materialistic forms.
Yeah. Because you're attaching optimism about the future to something that's temporary. We talked about this with wealth, right? Like generational wealth. You're attaching hope, which is a non-material thing, to a material thing. Fiat currency, gold bars, houses, yachts, whatever. So, of course, capitalism is a natural outgrowth of that because it's greed for something that you don't have, hunger for something you don't have. When what you're really hungering for
the
is
problem
true
is
wealth.
the solution that people put.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to substitute for capitalism something that's just as greedy, just as prone to coveting. Just different people covet different things, or only these people are allowed to covet and those people aren't. Right? That's more of a communist or something.
This is the problem with Romans 12. We're going right back to Romans 12 now. Is that if you interpret Romans 12 like a modern, you're going to misinterpret it because you're going to apply this basic ethos that we have lived in our whole lives to that.
You mean 13? You're talking about authority?
Romans 13, sorry, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One, you
Is
don't
that you
live in a
only see
hierarchical
it-
world anymore.
You're only seeing it
Flat.
in
Yeah.
flat hierarchy.
And you're
no
seeing
hierarchy.
it within a particular economy, a post-enlightenment economy.
Well, I mean, we've always criticized that to say how you got to read that as Paul in first century Rome, but we want to apply it universally because it is God's word. You're like, well, how do you apply this universally? Because it's like, I'm like, every king has said that they're God.
Right.
I
This is
mean,
why
everyone
don't
we meet
think
in the
it's
Bible.
actually true. I don't think it's actually true that politics has infiltrated every corner of our lives, even though that's the watchword of the day. No, it's not. It's not politics that have. Politics is the vehicle for capitalism, capitalist consumerism, like a rampant consumerism, a corporate techno luxury consumerism. That's really what's invaded every corner of our life because every corner of my life has been commodified and a value has been attached to it.
I mean, wouldn't it be? I mean, some people have actually thought, with a thought experiment, what it would be like to just have like a monarchy where you don't get to choose your rulers.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, actually, that's already true now, probably.
Right.
In a very practical way.
Right.
But like pure democracy is just consumeristic. Then is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Like, you pick somebody.
Yeah, because mob rule. It's mob rule. Democracy, like, again, how do you vote? With my pocketbook. I don't buy the product. The company suffers. They change the product. I start buying it. Their stocks go back up. Everybody's happy. Well, that's what you just described.
Yeah. So you got to change your
treat
stance
everything
on
that
this
way.
position so that I can get you elected so that you can go and do the same things that the last guy did.
Politicians, to put it in a less abstract, politicians are clowns. They're jesters. And what is the responsibility within the court of the king of the jester? Well, every once in a while they say something true about the king in public. Well, we see this all the time, right? They tell us the truth, but they just blame the other person for what they're actually doing. But most of the time they're fools. They're to behave like buffoons and to distract us from the reality of living under this monarchy.
My question is, what is the monarchy then? If they're the fools,
Right.
who is actually
Well, the
ruling?
corporations, BlackRock, State Street, that kind of thing, Vanguard, right? The oligarchs.
Yeah. Which is another agent of the government.
Like I said,
whatever that is.
You take that elevator all the way up to the top floor, you're going to meet the same guy at the table.
Or guys, gals, whatever.
No, there's just one at the top. The prince.
Of this world? What? Oh, you can't say that.
Yeah, I know, right? Silly cosmologies. Silly Bible.
Never mind. Silly Bible is what, that's what I was going to say.
And so, yes, his glory covers the heavens. The earth is full of his praise. What does that mean? Well, we would say it in the sense of the heavens, what is heavenly, covers all earthly things with meaning. Like, you can't understand, like we've been talking about, you cannot understand marriage or work or community or sacrifice
Or history.
or history correctly apart from Christ, because he is the Logos. He is reality. You can interpret it apart from the Logos, have fun. That's why we ended up with the Enlightenment. And now look at how that's turned out. So we again, like Luther's analogy of the drunk getting his foot in the stirrup, he throws himself over the saddle and ends up in the opposite ditch. We're never in the middle. We're always in opposite ditches. And at a certain point, you just get so frustrated with not ever being able to get on the horse that you kill the horse. You just leave the horse and stumble on down the road. And that's where we're at socially right now, is we're just lurching. We're just stumbling down the road because we can't trust the horse. We can't trust the barkeep. We can't trust anybody. So I guess we'll just wander off and try and find our way home. But we don't. Our home is up.
You think that's the majority? I mean, I wonder. It seems to me the majority is either in despair or naive hopefulness.
I think a majority of people live in quiet despair, to quote Simon and Garfunkel. Yeah, okay. A life of silent resignation. Most Christians, I think, live in actual despair.
Oh, well, especially most Christians. Yeah, especially most Christians.
Because they don't have Christ, which is horrible.
But I don't even. So you think that even like the transhumanists or the globalists or whatever, they're just as despairing. They're putting their hope somewhere else.
More so.
You think they're more?
Why would you willingly mutilate your body? Why would you turn yourself into a Lego meat puppet, a Lego meat Gnostic? Because you're hopeless. The only reason to be a Gnostic is because you despair of the earth and everything in it. Whereas, again, Genesis is very clear that we should rejoice in the work of God in creation and everything that goes with it. We were made to be sub-creators.
And the particularity of each person and unique gifts. And,
Like I understood Luther romantically, the apocryphal, what would you do if, you knew today was the last day, plant an apple tree or have sex with my wife. But people say, well, what do you do in the morning? I sit on the back deck and I call birds, and they come now because I've trained them to come and eat. And I talk to birds. Like, the world could be burning and I'd still be talking to my birds on the back deck. Why? Because that's heaven. Like, they're coming down from the heavens to tell me something. What are they telling you? That God is still my creator and my maker. He's still my redeemer. And he still mocks the nations. So well, I'm not afraid. He's not mocking me. He's mocking you guys. So go sit on your deck and enjoy a cup of coffee and talk to your birds or the trees, because that's what heaven's going to be like.
Maybe this is the homesteading craze. It's not so much about the homestead.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
But it's actually about growing
Little
and
Edens.
making. Yeah, exactly.
Being
I certainly have the hankering for that. I just don't have the funds. I'm waiting for the market to crash so I can buy something cheap.
We've talked about it before, but David Bowie in the early 90s or or late 80s in that interview said, I believe in the future that some guy's going to get home from a long day at the factory and sit down in his apartment in his chair and hold a block of wood in his hand and just massage it, because it will be the only thing natural and real left to him.
Which is pretty incredible, since he was a futurist, Bowie,
Yes.
in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
But he wasn't a futurist at the end.
I don't think he was. You listen to that
Dying
last
the
album,
way he
it's
did.
very disturbing. Very disturbing.
Right.
He was clearly
So yes,
struggling with
I
demons
think
there.
the pull on millennials to homestead is that 2020 and 2021 in particular destroyed their hope in innovation and technology and progress.
But it also,
and then when they said,
yeah.
what's left? And the answer was, that's not my problem. Just keep trusting.
And it's probably why, those controlling the money printers or whatever, have set up enough barriers now to prevent them from homesteading, because they can't have them retreat.
Right.
Or escape.
Right. As much as people don't want to face the truth, a vast majority of citizens in the United States, according to even the most liberal polls, a vast majority of Americans want Trump to be president in 2024. According to liberal polls, he's winning by like over a dozen points on any of the Democratic candidates. Why?
And why? Yeah, that's my
because
question.
He symbolizes something that isn't real, but it symbolizes something to people, which is he's a populist.
All right, we agree on that part.
He's a wall. He's a wall against the thing that we reject now. The thing that scared the hell out of us in 2020 and 2021, we're willing to accept his failings because he's a wall against that terrible thing that we're all afraid of. And the other side
Do you think that's an
represents
illusion?
the thing.
I think it's an illusion.
Of course it's an illusion. I just said it was. He symbolizes that, but it's not real.
Okay.
But what's your option? What's your option, though? Right? You have two globalists, you have two corporatist parties, you have two sets of clowns. What do? Well, I always tell people, don't vote, otherwise you're the part of the problem. You can't complain if you vote. You voted for the problem. Yeah. Well, what do I do instead? You go out on your deck and you talk to the birds and you have a cup of coffee. Because Psalm 2, that's why. Or Psalm 33, pick it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
In the end, it doesn't matter. My authority that I answer to created Caesar. My authority said to Peter, go open that fish's mouth.
We're the victims of Caesar. I don't know why you're saying this.
There we go. No, actually, I am the Lord of Caesar, according to the Bible.
I don't
because
believe
the entire
that.
kingdom has been given to me and to you and to all those who are baptized into Christ.
It's a fun exercise, and I've encouraged people to do this. I don't know if anybody takes me up on it, but I'm like, just call or email your the people that you're upset with, the senators, the legislators, the whatever. Yeah. It's amazing how they respond, because they do, because they are very sensitive people. You wouldn't think. You think you'd have to be callous. No, they're very sensitive. They do care what you think. They don't usually get to hear.
What kind of people are drawn to power? Not secure people. No. Strong people are not drawn to power. Right? The best kings are the ones who run away from the crown.
Those are the kings we want, anyway.
Right. Watch Gladiator.
That's all right.
Watch Gladiator. It's perfect.
Did you see the synopsis of the sequel?
Yes, I did.
I am not encouraged.
It is what it is. No, of course
Okay,
not.
there you go.
You can't capture magic twice. You can't do that. No. It's like Master and Commander. Yes, you could have made 12 sequels and followed the books and it would have been fantastic, but I have Master and Commander. It's a perfect movie. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I don't know.
No,
it is surprising they never, it is interesting they never made a sequel. It is interesting.
Yes.
You would have expected that.
Part of it was it bombed kind of when it came out.
Yeah, I know.
It didn't do well.
I'm sure
it was super expensive.
Yeah.
In the end, yeah, because it's a cult classic now, as we say, but no, it goes to the point, as we said, is that the patterns of reality force their way, or as he says, right, God invaded. God is going to go in there with his people and invade. Reality invades. So you make a movie that rejects all of the cosmology of the Bible, and yet there's baptism, and there's blood, and there's a savior, and there's a Satan, and there's a hell, and there's all these things occurring in these stories. And you go, how do these godless atheist people who are writing this thing not see this stuff? There we go.
Yeah.
You can reject reality, but it's still real. You can't escape it. You can either participate or you can choose not to participate. It's in my sermon for Sunday. The reason that we get sick and suffer and die is because we refuse to participate in the Logos. That's our sin.
That's hard to hear.
It is. But there's an easy solution to that. Come to the liturgy.
Well, and if you trust secular science people, they will say that that religiously observant, faithful people, Christian observant people, are healthier and happier and more content. And
I would say as a pastor that's a lie. I don't know who they're talking to, but
I don't know. They maybe they're more anxious about different things, right?
Sure,
Yeah,
we'll put it that way. But I know for a fact that my people in Bible class on Sundays, as soon as I walk in the room, joke with me and say, "Yes, we're talking about Thor again, Pastor," because they mean the weather. And I just like, why do you worship Thor so much?
Oh, you've trained them well. I like that.
I have. It's fun. We have this little back and forth. And it's good because pastorally speaking, they know that I disapprove of them being so invested in the weather. And I know that they know. So we don't have to talk about it. We just joke about it. And that's their form of repentance, right? And then why am I there? Because God sent me into the room to break the narrative and say, there's only one Thunder Lord, and that's Yahweh, right? He comes with clouds and thick darkness and thunder and lightning, and the earth trembles and the rocks break apart at his coming. You're like, yay, Good Friday.
Who's being described? Oh, yeah, not Thor.
Yeah. No, not. All right, so hands off, Taika. So now we have verse 4. His brightness was like the light. Rays flashed from his hand, and there he veiled his power. He's a wizard, Harry. That is why heaven and earth were full of his praise. For his might, that is his kingdom, was veiled. It was covered in the people of Israel. Israel is God's clothing. He clothes himself in the flesh of Israel. For no one beheld him, but when he did such wondrous things, these works were as light that manifested his presence. They emanated from him like brightness from the sun in the clouds, and like rays from his hands, that is, from his strength which he demonstrated. For although the sun is hidden under the clouds, its light reveals its presence. Thus the brightness issued not from the countenance of the Lord, he was concealed there, but from his hands, that is, his presence was evident from his works. And of this it is said that heaven and earth were full of his praise. The Hebrew language calls such rays horns, thus Moses' horns in the sculpture. According to Exodus 34, verse 29, Moses had horns. That is the brightness in his face.
This reminds me of a conversation I had the other day, and I was with the children, and I said, well, in heaven there's no need for sun or moon. And they're like, what? I'm like, no, Jesus lights up the heavens. And they're like, what? What are you talking about? I'm like, and they're like, wait a minute, that means Jesus, there's no darkness, there's no night. No, there's no darkness, there's night. Because we were talking about going to sleep is dying. And they're like, what?
Yeah.
Like, no, you die and you rise every day. And they're like,
yeah.
I'm like, don't you pray this way? And they're like, and then the one was like, no, we changed the words to, if I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. They have a different version where it's like until the morning light or something. And I'm like, well, that's still, that's how it got us on the tangent to say, well, Jesus is the light who wakes you in the morning. And they're like, huh? What are you talking about, Pastor? That's the sun. I'm like, well, who created the sun?
Well, he's also called the Son of Righteousness by Malachi.
S-U-N. Jeremiah. Yeah, and Malachi.
Jeremiah, sorry.
Yeah. So it's just... so this cosmology thing that we've been harping on here now for a bit, but it's interesting how
we have to, because everybody you listen to, unfortunately in 30 years, I've never heard a pastor say that that's not a metaphor.
And Luther doesn't say it isn't a metaphor, but he doesn't limit it to saying it's only metaphor. He's like, no, he is the light that shines from the heavens. The brightness does, but it's also known in his works. Like, correct. Okay, right.
It's both, right.
Right, and he lights our path. Is that a metaphor, or is that literal? Right. Well, like I would be in darkness, so I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Right. And yet I know the way through because he shows me. Right. And he shows me through his speaking, which is a light, the light of his word.
But it's an actual physical light that is covered by the heavenly presence. It's both and. His work is the light, the physical light, the photon. And his presence on that is how he embodies that.
So even like when we meet as Christians in the dark, we lights.
Yes.
Yes. Not just because we need to be able to see each other or know everything, but because darkness is not good.
Right.
I mean, it's good for sleep, I suppose.
Well, we have to ask what it symbolizes. And this goes back to the whole point of dying when you go to sleep and you enter into the cave, into the darkness, into the abyss, and how he pulls you out of that as he pulled the earth from the waters in the beginning. He does the same thing when he pulls you out of sleep in the morning.
Yeah. Oh. Huh. I think on those terms. I don't know why they don't. I mean, you think with children, but it's maybe it's just the uncosmologizing. I don't know. There's got to be a word. Demythologizing, probably.
Disenchanted. They're all
Disenchanting.
Because they don't read books.
It is true. Well, like I said, they hadn't.
Yeah.
Like read Percy Jackson. It's not even. They're not that well written or anything, but at least they let you believe. Yeah, that there's gods and angels and demons and all this kind of.
Yeah.
Or Harry Potter. I mean, you could do that, I suppose. My kids were.
Yeah.
We got the UK edition. I had them imported because I don't like the editorial changes they made to the US edition. So.
What did they do?
Mostly language.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they make it more American English. It's Philosopher's Stone instead of what is it in U.S.? What was it? The movie? Not Philosopher's Stone, Sorcerer's Stone. Because we don't know what the
Sorcerer. That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
it's Philosopher's Stone, the original.
That's the Bernstein Bears effect right there.
Is it
retconning stuff? Well, retconning it so that So the 5th verse: before him went pestilence, and plague issued at his feet. One of the rays that sprang from his hands was his smiting of Egypt, killing all the firstborn in one night. That was Passa Domini, his passing. That is where he left these footprints. Wherever he stepped, pestilence came forth at his feet.
He put all enemies under his feet. Yeah.
Yes, he does. And his feet are Moses and Aaron, by the way. Again, it's embodied. This isn't a disembodied God. He embodied him. Again, you are my mouth. Right. He's very particular that he embodies himself in Moses.
Well, this question. I'm like, well, how could Moses not be God to Pharaoh? Right. Then you say, well, he's as if he's God or something. Like, no. How else? God works. Like, God's working.
Right.
Moses is part. Right. I mean, he's part of the. In a sense, I don't understand why you would have to, like, in the sense or as if, or it's like, no. As far as Pharaoh's concerned, Moses is God to him. Because Moses,
because he is
right.
He says, "Whatever you say is me." Like, what you say is my words. Your mouth, my words. If you don't believe that, why are you preaching on Sunday? What are you?
Oh,
preaching?
I know. I believe that. I don't understand.
I'm just saying in a general why people, sense.
Yeah.
It's like, this is the word.
Or why?
Of the Lord
why are you confessing to your pastor?
Right.
If you don't believe the absolution is God's absolution, right?
Better you than God, right? I mean. This is, again, that disembodied faith. It's a Gnostic faith. And it's so natural to us that we gravitate toward it.
I know,
right?
but
like
to me it's so weird now. I don't know.
Paulson said this during COVID, right? That we're all fanatics by nature. The old Adam is a fanatic by nature. He wants to be disembodied, right? This is why we reject the sacraments and the liturgy as the binding agent. Like, we have to get rid of anything that puts us in our flesh and locates us in space and time.
I can watch it on the internet. That's nice.
Exactly, because then I exist in space, not time. And now we're back to the first verse.
And not in body either.
Yeah. Well, again, no body, no time, no death. Yeah. This is why it's very, very dangerous what we do. Like, what we're doing right now is very dangerous. People don't realize this.
What, the momentary?
This is a mirror. Well, no, first of all, the internet and live streaming is a mirror. And you're opening a door, you're letting us in, and you're making a point of comparison based on
I like calling it the black mirror,
Yeah, it is the black mirror. So there's that, symbolically speaking, but there's also, again, the certain verticality that has to be taken into consideration. Is like, I'm not saying this for my own benefit, but I am benefiting from saying it. Right.
This is why I actually
simultaneity of it.
I appreciate AI for this in this regard.
Yeah.
Is that I was watching a show and they did it was historic fiction, so they did AI generated politicians, and there's enough video and audio footage that they can do this, and it's you can tell, but not in a way, but it won't take long before they know that it's actually you and I talking to each other, and it's not an AI that generated a version of us in some future horizon. It may be indistinguishable, except for it'll be non-intelligible because there'll be no momentariness to it.
This morning I watched a side-by-side comparison of an AI clip from a year ago and an AI clip from today, from like now. It looked like something that was done 40 years ago compared to now.
A year ago.
Like,
a year ago.
Yeah. It was like it was distorted, and the face kept doing all kinds of weird, like, flingy things. And then you jump forward a year, and it was in downtown Tokyo, and I could not tell you that it wasn't real, except, like you said, it was a little too perfect. Like everything was just a little bit too pristine. But otherwise, I'm like,
well, and they'll solve
year,
that. They'll solve that. They'll add facial tics and things just
in a year, within a year.
Yeah.
Right. I see it in video games all the time already. And so to your point, but there's, again, like we talked about in the past, there's one thing that they'll never have, which is nous, N-O-U-S, nous. They'll never have intuition. They can simulate it, but they can't have it. And intuition, that's the thing that drives us to say, I need something more meaningful. I need something bigger. I need a higher purpose, and I need a higher heavenly meaning.
Well, that's why we don't script the show. See, and that's why I don't think it could be replicated via AI, even if they have, if they scrape all thousands of hours of our conversations that are on the internet.
Right.
Because this is a holy conversation. And it's a momentary one. It's in the context of everything. Well, it's everything happening to us now, and everything we've read this week, or what we've watched, or what people say in the chat. There's something about it's not just performative, although performances have that, right? Like you want to be there in person, watching the live, concert video. They fake those anyway, right? With overdubs and edits. But you want to. There's something you want to be there in the moment. I can't watch like recorded versions of sporting events. It doesn't work for me because it's like it's already passed. It's already gone. It's not now.
But that's my point, is that we're moving further and further into this, so that rather than listen to what you and I are saying and then go out and embody that in the world to real people, like go sacrifice your life for another person today. That's what I'm telling you to do. You'll listen to this and say, that was interesting, that was provocative, I disagree, whatever. And then turn off the car, turn off your phone, and walk away from it as if it didn't exist, as if nothing happened.
Is that because we're not giving action items at the end of every episode?
No, because we're not localized. When you see me in the store, something happens. When you see me at church, something happens.
I would say this. I mean, I've had this happen. People listen to what we're doing here, and then they confront me, or they want to talk to me in another context, in person, right? Yes. And then we continue the dialogue, and then things happen.
Correct.
Right. So it creates opportunity for dialogue, because they say, you said this crazy thing on the podcast. Right. I'm like, okay, let's talk about it. And I think,
and maybe other people do this, so I won't. But for myself, anyways, what I've noticed distinguishes me from other people is when I read a book, I don't treat it as a set of ideas that are laid out for me to accept or deny. I see it as, this person's trying to teach me something, and I'm the student. And so whatever they teach me, one way or the other, whether I agree, disagree, or I'm indifferent, this book is going to change my life.
Well, I started reading that economics book you told me to buy, and it's making me so mad. Oh, it's making me so angry. Because it's like, but I hear the argument, and I can understand why it's so popular, right? Which I wouldn't have heard before unless I had taken the time to try to read the thing.
Right.
I'm like, I mean, this is 100% Keynesian economics in the worst possible way. And I can see why it's so popular, because it sounds
it transformed an entire continent.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
but right.
That's something. So something in there is appealing, right? Again, economics as if people mattered. Yes, on a philosophical level, you can say I disagree with all of it. But on a local level, it changed an entire nation
right.
in one direction to the present tense.
Right.
And so there's something there. You know?
No, I know. And that's of course, we're doing it here again. We don't usually disagree with Luther, but even if we're reading somebody that we don't agree with, who was I thinking? I thought we should read some Eastern people. Somebody was speaking very positively of Seraphim Rose. It's been a long time since.
I follow him on Substack. I interact with him on that platform. Yeah.
Tried to read any of the books. Right. I know.
Yeah.
Right. And having, it's kind of like Alan Watts was that way too for me. It's like, he's a hard guy to read, and I don't necessarily agree where he comes from. But
I would say that I enjoyed Alan Watts until I found out about his personal life and his biography, and then I
why is that disqualifying?
Because it doesn't disqualify him. It just frames it within the context of like, oh, now I see what you're doing. It's like Capon. Capon's the same way. Capon's trying to rationalize his divorce and his adultery. He's trying to rationalize it. You can hear it.
Yep.
Right. It comes through. Again, I'm not going to stop reading Capon. I like what he says, but it colors it and lets me know.
It does.
The reason that this sounds strange is because I think what you're really saying, you're talking to yourself right here, right? And every teacher does that. I do it. We're doing it on the show right now. It's just that I try to put it in autobiographical language so you understand I'm talking about myself. to give you a sense of like separation from what I'm talking about. So it's not like, oh, he's accusing me or pointing a finger at me or talking in general. I'm like, no, I've experienced this. But it's like, again, I've started now in the last week recommending Ephraim the Syrian to people, but I've been reading him for almost 4 months. Why? Because I wanted to be comfortable recommending him after having read into him. Why is to say, like, is this just an initial, like, ooh, it's different, and the novelty of it?
I think he's mostly, I think it's a good example because he's mostly disconnected from his biography, right? What we have of his writings are not, it's harder for them to be colored by an autobiography.
Because they're poetic. Yeah, there's Semitic poetry. Right. Augustine, as a good counterpoint, Augustine is entirely autobiographical all the time.
It's very hard to read. Yeah, it's hard to read Augustine without hearing his biography in the background.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, it's like Basil. I've been reading Basil the Great lately. I like what Basil has to say. Obviously, John Chrysostom's fantastic. He kind of bridges East and West to a certain extent. I like Gregory of Nyssa's commentary on Exodus. I think it's amazing. But I think what, when it comes to the Eastern, especially the Desert Fathers, they're so alien, so strange, even to early church theologians, theology like Augustine and Jerome and others, that what I've experienced in sharing that is an immediate negative reaction to it. Like, what is this? This is wrong.
I've been that way for a long time, but I'm starting to open up a little bit. Yeah.
But recognizing like your response to them is because you do not want to engage them in conversation and you do not want to be taught by them. Because they're not on the reading list of approved names, which again makes them perfect for banned books.
Yeah, they don't talk the way I talk, or they don't communicate a doctrine the way I communicate the doctrine, or what.
It's like, well, this guy lived in Syria in the 300s. He better not talk the way you did. Or this guy was Iranian, and lived in Iran in the 300s. This guy lived in the 1200s in Great Britain. So yeah, he shouldn't talk the way you talk. And yeah, like Melody says, local authors are messy, right? And to your point too about the prophetic voice, no one takes the prophet seriously because a prophet is never welcomed in his own.
They can only be known in later.
Right.
I mean, I think Jeremiah is probably that way for sure, right? I mean, they obviously was not received well in his own day.
No,
he's
like,
dead.
You want us to throw you down the well, or do you know the way? He's like, I know the way. I'll just lower myself. It's fine. And so I think that's why they fit perfectly within the banned books ethos here. But it is just to go to say that, I think that when you read someone, like when I read Nietzsche and got back into Nietzsche a couple of years ago, I read everything by him because I wanted a much deeper understanding of his teachings, not just the popular stuff. And I went through it and I love it. And it's embodied now. I embody that philosophy. But now I'm picking it apart and saying like, get rid of this. Oh, I see where you're coming from. It takes time. And I think it's arrogant to go to Luther's point. It's extremely arrogant to read someone once or twice, or even read like a couple books by a person and then be like, I got this. It's like, do you though? It's like I was explaining to someone on Wednesday morning, the first time I tell a story, I will tell it verbatim the way that the original author told it. I will, because it's not mine, it's theirs. And I agree with it, but I don't understand the mechanics of the story yet. I don't understand why it works. And then I'll retell it. And then the next time I retell it, it'll be 99% that author, but a little bit of me now. By the time I tell that story 10 or 12 times, it's become my story. Because I've added, I've subtracted, I've adjusted, I've made it local. I've localized that story now, right? Because I'm telling it to people that live here. And so like, I don't live with sailors, right? I live amongst agrarian people. I live in the plains. So when I talk about ships and stuff, they get it in a abstract level, but it's not real, right? And so I have to change water to the rolling plains. It's the same undulating symbolism. It's the same thing in a sense, right? And I'll break these things down. And then it becomes my story now. So instead of about being set on the ocean with Moby Dick, let's say, it'll be set on the plains and it will be with like a bear or something, right? Or a herd of buffalo. It'll be something local. And so that's what we do.
You could just put wheels on the ship. You could still have
do that too. Wagons. Yeah, sure. Wagons.
Oh, a wagon. Okay.
Yeah. But the point is that in the telling of the Bible, when you tell a biblical story and you talk about like the sower and the seeds, tell it the way Jesus tells it. And then as you retell the story, add to it. Don't change the narrative that Jesus lays out. That's the core truth. That's the universal truth. You can't change that part. Otherwise, the whole thing will fall apart. It'll stop living. It'll cease living. But take the sower and the seeds and then add to it. And what I mean is, as you keep telling that story, you will see Jesus, the seed, and you will see the Father sowing his seed everywhere. that you go. You'll see it in people's lives. You'll see it in the ground itself come harvest or planting time and harvest time. You'll see it everywhere. But you have to start by just telling the story of that parable verbatim. And then over time, it will grow and live in your life. And then other people will take that and they'll do the same thing. And I think that we have to focus on that. I should be recording this because Kelsey wants me to write an article about this. But this is what we do in our preaching as pastors, God willing, is that you take all these biblical texts and you embody them. And then you see it happening in people's lives. This is why you have to stay somewhere long enough as a pastor to actually see people's life naked.
I said this the other day, and I've said it in other contexts too. We were reading Acts chapter 2. I was just reviewing this for my new catechumens, because I usually start there. It's like, here's the beginning of the church, so you understand like what you're getting involved in, right? And they're doing all sorts of miracles, right? I mean, great wonders are being done amongst the apostles. I am convinced that there were unique apostolic gifts. I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
Saying, the first couple generations, you just read the book of Acts, they seem to drop out even in the narrative, right? Even in the story.
Yeah.
It becomes less important. It's more about just the preaching and the absolving. But I said, why do we presume that they cannot happen, right?
Right.
Like we don't necessarily have a promise. But we also aren't told that they can't. So as the prophets, so Jesus, so the apostles, why not the apostolic church? I said, I've seen miracles. I don't know what else to call them. People coming back to life, diseases disappearing. Like, I don't know where it went.
Wonders.
Yeah. Signs and wonders, right? I saw the eclipse. I know that Jesus is coming. I did that just for you. This is always, maybe it's that cosmology question again, is like we've flattened everything so far down that we can't even believe that God could do something above nature. Well, wait a minute. Not everything is natural in this world. I mean, being born again of water and the Spirit.
World. Right.
I mean,
God
baptism is
not we made the world
natural. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And two, then if you're saying that God isn't involved in nature, then who made it? And also,
it's the divine watchmaker. He made it and walked away.
Exactly.
Well, then what's he doing now?
Right. There is nowhere in the Bible that God is called a watchmaker or someone who just sits back and goes, "Well, that's happening now."
Yeah.
Because even what Luther said about Habakkuk, about the time, he's still with you in it. He's not outside of that, watching you and going like, let's see what he does with.
No, he's measuring. He's measuring the time. He's counting the years. He's like, the time's not right yet.
Right.
My hour is not yet come. Jesus says over and over. And like, wait a minute, how do you know?
Right. Here, do this as an exercise. Here's an application part of the sermon.
Okay, here we go.
Sometime today, I want you to count your steps, whether it be from like the living room to the bathroom, to the kitchen to the garage, from the parking lot, your car into your office. Count them. And then when you stop walking, I want you to acknowledge the fact that God just counted every one of those steps, because that's what it means that he measures your steps. He counted every one of those steps, and he walked
1,278 steps today. I have not really moved yet.
Right. There we go. He counted every one of those steps. He moved with you, and he laid down the path for every one of your steps. He is a light unto my path, right? Every one of those steps, he counted those steps and measured them out for you, so that no matter where you come to rest at, he's already counted them out. The path has already been laid by him, because he is the path.
So how does that not come off as being deterministic? Yeah. Or mechanical, or like robotic or something? It's like, you understand what I'm saying? Is that this is what people say. Well, then that's fatalistic even. All right. Or, karma or something.
Well, you're not thinking of it relationally. When I walk into the house in a couple minutes, my wife will know exactly what kind of podcast we did. Without me saying a word, she'll know. She'll know. Because she knows me, right?
There's an aura.
She knows everything about me. There's my facial expressions, my body language, how I even open the door communicates to her how it went.
Maybe how you smell. I don't know. That's subconscious, maybe.
Everything about my demeanor, how I carry myself. And so the fact that he walks with you is that conscience, your sense of standing in relation to him. He walks with you every step.
I like the idea that he's walking before me, smiting everything that's in my way.
There is that too. That's in the Psalms, right? He is a shield. He absorbs the arrows of the enemy so they don't strike me. Is that deterministic? I don't even know what that means. Right?
It's the wrong category. It's wrong language.
Right.
Yes.
Absolutely. It's like saying literal versus metaphorical. I'm like, those are post-enlightenment, post-scientific categories.
Sure.
I don't understand what you mean. Is the Bible literally true? What does that even mean?
It's written down.
Like
Okay,
Beowulf is literally
fine.
true. It's written down. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
what do you
right.
mean? You think before you speak. Think deeply about what you're saying. Like, here, I'll read this. This is out of context. This is from Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 16 actually. The cup in the Lord's right hand will surround you. This means, says Luther, you will not be able to escape or ward off the cup and the disaster, for the Lord has become your cup bearer. He will present the cup to you to drink, and you must drain it. And there is no escape. Who can resist God? If it were a man's will and decision to make you drink thus, you might find help and means to resist. But now that the Lord himself is sending this cup to you, you have to suffer it. The cup will hem you in on all sides so that you cannot escape it anywhere. And then this is the best part. This is easily understood from what was said before.
That's awesome.
Right?
Yeah.
The cup, the right hand of the Lord. He is your cup bearer. Who is it that gives you the cup at the railing when you come to the sacrament on Sunday morning? Is it Donovan's hand? Yes. Is it the Lord handing it to you? Yes.
Well, you also
Where's
have
your
Christ
problem?
describing the cup of his cross, right? And it's like,
Yes.
I have to
And
drink the cup my Father's giving me.
you want to go even bigger, because I keep referring to it. In the early medieval church and in the early church, the fact that his blood and his water pour out onto the ground sanctifies the earth and makes it his chalice, so that he can
The
be
earth.
all in all.
Yeah.
And
Drink
you're like,
deeply
wait,
from
what?
the well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they had the holy wells
Yeah.
too. We've talked about that before.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. The holy wells in Ireland. Can't drink from the pagan wells. They have spirits. So you have to, again, like I've said before, you don't have to agree with the cosmology of the Bible or the symbolism. But if you're going to read the Bible, you kind of got to play by their rules. If Moses says you got to play by his rules.
I mean, the story of the Exodus makes it doesn't
Zero
fit.
sense.
It doesn't work.
Zero.
It doesn't make any sense. Yeah.
It's the
Well, it can't-
stupidest decision ever. Let's walk out into the wastelands and die.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, that's true. As far as like the meaning of it doesn't make sense. But
Right.
I'm saying it like historically can't make sense. Like
Right.
none of these things
Right.
could have actually happened. Oh, Pharaoh's
Right.
people, Pharaoh's magicians couldn't do anything like that. You're like, what?
Right.
Right. And that's the first problem. And then the second problem is like Moses couldn't do that. It was red algae. And you're like, why?
Yes, exactly. Yes. Or
Why are we going-
versus the fact that it's baby's blood? Because the Pharaoh
Well,
used to
that's
sacrifice children in the river.
true. So
Every
the Lord
day.
opened the deep of all the
Yes.
the graves of
All the blood
of
of Abel came up out of the river. Yeah. Patterns.
ouch.
Yeah, the
Mhm.
blood of Abel cries out from the earth. Yeah, the blood of the children that you sacrificed in this river, I'm going to actually release it all. Because again, again, Ezekiel, right? The judgment of God is just giving you what you've judged others with.
Mhm,
The
right.
judgment that falls on you is he just turns it back on you. So all the babies that Pharaoh kills in the river, those magi kill, all those sorcerers, by the way, not magi, sorcerers, killed all those babies in the river. And God says, oh, is that how you want to play this game? Fine. Have it all. Let's not sacrifice a couple today or even 100. Let's sacrifice all of it at one time. I mean, that's what Jesus is,
Yeah.
the Lamb of all lambs. Let's stop playing games with this blood sacrifice stuff. Let's just do it all at one time. Let's just shed all the
right.
blood at one time, right? And so, yes, Abel's blood cries out from the earth, so Jesus' blood bleeds into the earth to cover Abel's cries.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, now we're back to the mystery thing, and we're back to the incomprehensibility of most of what the Bible has to say, which is
Well,
fantastic.
I always wonder then what people do with the older hymnody, because it has no problem
Sure.
with this, especially
Yeah.
pre-enlightenment.
It's crazy.
Right? I mean, even
Yeah.
thinking like "Glory be to Jesus," you basically just quoted, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're like, well, Abel's blood for vengeance from the.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
right.
Anyway, like I don't know what you do with all of that.
Which, by the way, goes
apart
back
from
to my
just say-
point. Before you go any further, the thing about telling stories and making your own story, that's a perfect example. I know that hymn by heart, and I didn't think of it once when I said that. And like you said, I basically just quoted that entire hymn. That's what I mean.
Well, so maybe this is what happens. Is it's like, well, that's just poetic license. That's just poetry. That's not real. I'm like,
yeah. Okay.
I don't know these categories. I guess it's like that you're helping me understand that.
Poetry used to be understood as a way to communicate incomprehensible truths in a way that's
Correct.
comprehensible.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. Yeah. Even a haiku.
Yeah. Maybe not. You can try though.
Oh, I was going to ask
this
you about
is-
fables, but
Right.
we'd be gone for a while.
That's another hour. Go read Tolkien on fairy stories. Yes.
Because I read an Aesop fable because I was comparing it to a parable for the children, and they're like, "That's a totally different kind of story." I'm like, "Exactly."
Yes.
Parables are not fables.
Right. Fables are downstream of parables.
Maybe.
But, well, because a fable doesn't say the kingdom of God is like. Right. Like Aesop's fable about the dog and stealing the bone and dropping it in the river because he's barking at his own reflection. That is extremely parabolic because there it is, the mirror.
Well, no, but the difference
water
was
and
what
flesh and
we
God
noticed is like, okay, maybe the fable's meaning isn't always inherently known, and that way it's similar to a parable.
Right.
But the fable, they always give you the moral. They always tell you
Right.
how to read it at the end.
Correct. Yes.
Because if they don't tell you how to read it, then it's that's the
There's
problem.
no mystery. They have to take the mystery out of it. Right.
Correct.
And the mystery is Christ. That's the problem. The mystery is Christ. Right. It's like when, again, going back to the example, when Jesus says to Peter, open the fish's mouth and there's a coin. And then I say, Jesus is the coin. And people are like, what do you mean? I'm like, you don't see that Jesus is the coin?
What was the temple
The lost coin?
That makes sense.
Right? Or that he's the coin and the fish. Right? It's like, it's theological imagination. And it's not only reading the Bible as a whole, but to your point, it's tapping into those hymns, those pre-modern hymns that actually apparently grasp this because it's the language of the hymns, reading the early church guys, reading the early medieval people, because things really do start to get, what do you want to say, tied down in the Middle Ages. By the late medieval period, when Luther finally rebels, you have the penitential system. Things are pretty battened down, bolted down.
Yeah.
Jesus sits on a rainbow bridge with a sword coming in and out, back and forth and so on. And then we have an explosion for a little bit in the 1520s. And then we try to, control that. And then we have the 16, 17, 1800s where it just goes from bad to worse to more.
There are those who are fighting against it during that time.
Oh, constantly.
There's
but
outliers.
We have to remember, John Douglas Hall wrote a book on the theology of the cross in the 80s, I think. And he said this, is that the theology of the cross is a thin tradition at the best of times. And it often slows to a trickle. And that's what you're referring to, is that the theology of the cross is simply saying Christ is Lord. Like you're pointing to the cross of Jesus Christ, and you're not trying to dress it up with roses, as Luther says in Heidelberg. But it's understanding that at the best of times, the theology of the cross is a thin tradition. It's a remnant tradition. That's what Luther's drawing on, is the language of remnant. And then at the best of times in the culture, when the culture is at its zenith, the theology of the cross slows to a trickle because very few theologians have the balls to stand up and say, this is the worst it's ever been. Because everything around you is the best it's ever been. Who's going to say to Solomon?
We're too comfortable.
Yes.
Yeah, we're too comfortable.
Who's going to walk into the temple and say to Solomon, this is the worst it's ever been in the history of Israel, and it's all your fault, wise one? It's like, no one's going to say that. That's ridiculous. And yet we see the prophets come after, and they keep warning the people, and then the dispersion happens, and then they listen, which goes back to Habakkuk and Luther's commentary. And so right now, we are poised in our culture, in the United States, in our society, we are poised now for the children to say to the fathers and the grandfathers, what the hell have you done? Why didn't you warn us? Which is super exciting for me, because, cross-bearing's fun when the kids are screaming, preach. It's not so fun when they're saying, shut up and go away.
Yeah.
But
No, I agree
people
with
at my
that.
gym, like I said to you last week, one of my coaches listens to my sermons, and he's not religious in the least, but he loves my sermons. And I was, shocked and pleased that he listens to them.
Absolutely.
And I have people at the gym now, this is almost 9 years into this, like I can talk about being a Christian, being a pastor, and they're not uncomfortable with the conversation anymore. In fact, they want me to talk about it. Well, what changed? Well, there's an event.
Yeah,
Change
everything
people's
around us
perspective.
changed. Everything around us
Yeah.
changed.
And on the other side, there's people that used to talk to me that want nothing to do with me anymore. They don't look at me anymore. We used to talk about this stuff all the time.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. And again, the Holy Spirit blows where he will blow. The wind goes, and we don't know where it comes from or where it goes. But
Correct.
the Lord's right hand will surround you, and the cup is in his right hand. That's good. The cup of mercy. But you will drink it, as he says. You will drink it because you cannot ward off the cup and the disaster that comes with that. Because to drink the cup of the Lord is to be in the world, but not of it. It's to take your cross and say, give me more. That's what it means to be holy, right? It's not good, but it is holy, and it's true, and it's beautiful. It's good because it's him. So yeah, you either go out the door and look at the whole earth as the chalice of the Lord, and then go to the Lord's table and drink from the chalice of the Lord, or you live in a rejection of that reality. But it doesn't change reality.
And then what happens?
And then,
right? The beautiful thing about the song, we're not going to get there, but he goes through all the destruction and the misery and everything that they have to suffer and experience, and the nations go through around them.
Oh, I think we should do this again next week.
You want to? I don't know.
Yeah, there's only 11, there's 16 verses, 17, 18, there's
19.
20 verses.
20, yeah.
We made it through 5.
Okay, well then maybe we can.
We could
I don't.
going.
He doesn't have as
We haven't
much
done a series in a while.
Okay,
We haven't done a series on Luther.
We'll make it a
Galatians.
two-parter.
We'll
make it a two-parter.
Well, we have to keep reading this until we get to the next person that comes up in our conversation that we're then going to read, like Maximus or Ephraim or whoever.
Okay, all right.
Whatever.
Fair enough.
Yeah, we could read Chrysostom again too. That would be fun. If you don't see Christ in the beggar at the door, you won't see him in the chalice. I read that last night and posted. I was like, holy crap. Yeah, if you don't see Christ in the beggar at the door, you're not going to see him in the chalice. I was like, all right.
No, that was to that point we were making earlier. Yeah, there it is.
Yeah. So I think, to wrap it up from my side of things, what we've done is we've divided everything to either or. We've created a division between creation and salvation, and then sanctification is just kind of floating around there in the second article, kind of, sort of, in the creed.
Whatever that means.
Right? Versus if you tie sanctification to vocation, then it is firmly planted in the first article of the creed, because it's in the world that you're bearing your crosses. And it's actually when you come into the liturgy that the cross is actually being held off of you for that moment to say, this is where we put our crosses down at the door. Here is where you receive true comfort from heaven, right? But as soon as you walk out that door, you pick your cross up at the exit, you put it back on your shoulder, and out you go. That's why people say, I'm so relaxed, I'm so calm when I'm in church. Good, you should be. It's supposed to be an oasis. It's supposed to be that moment of respite like we talked about earlier.
I think it's fair to say, though, that your cross is, maybe you're strengthened so that you can bear it. It seems lighter afterwards. I don't know.
Sure.
Maybe that's a good way to put it. Because it's not like it changes. I mean, your earthly vocations don't really change much from when you enter to when you exit,
The difference is this.
service.
When I'm sacramentally with Christ, his burden is easy and his yoke is light.
Yeah. That's what I'm trying to wrestle
vocation,
with, how to communicate
and
that.
I'm not sacramentally connected to him, it's heavy. It's really heavy sometimes, right?
Because you lack the strength.
Because I lack the strength. And even living liturgically, as we've talked about, this is why I have the sacrament every day now. I need it every day because, again, the further down the road I get with this stuff, the more I need it. And so I just have it every day. And if I need it, my kids need it, my family needs it, so we have it every day as a part of our liturgy. And we start the day off that way, and I encourage everyone to do that if they can. Because, then it grounds you in creation, but it grounds you in the second article, in the first article, and the third article is there covering the whole thing. Like we said, the Holy Spirit gives meaning to the Word. And then the Word embodies itself in creation. That's why it's a Trinity. It's a unity and multiplicity. And so again, the Holy Spirit gives meaning to the Word, and then the Word is embodied in the first article in the creation.
From my perspective, not the likelihood. The promise is actually that will, the Word will be manifest in you by way of liturgy, word and sacrament, preached and received in His body and blood, in a way that, the old trope is like, we just need people to be studying the Bible more or praying more. I'm like, well, I think you're right. But what you're looking to gain from that, you're trying to do it apart from the Christian community often, right? So people aren't praying together, they're praying alone. Not to say you can't pray alone, all right? But the benefit of praying together in community, ordering your days in the Lord's peace, that is in His word of forgiveness, second article especially. Right. That's what's being lost. And then there's this kind of almost implicit denial that of the promises attached to Christ's body and blood, right?
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's explicit, but it's almost implicit. It's just like, well, and because we had generations of sacrament maybe a few times a month kind of thing. Yeah. Like, well, it's kind of there as an accessory. And I'm like, that's not the view of either Jesus or the church or
no,
the church
it's actually
fathers
the thing. It's the central focal point.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even if you want to go with, go ahead.
I was going to say the center of the city versus the center of God's city, right? The earthly city. What's the center of any earthly city? Well, it's City Hall. It's the seat of power. What's the center of God's city? It's the altar. It's the sacrament. It's Jesus' body and blood.
Yeah.
It's a meal.
Yeah.
So you have to ask, what are you eating? Yeah. So when you go to the center of any city, what are you eating? Any earthly city? What is being offered there for you? Well, nothing, because you're the actually food for the city. You're the food. Like the city lives off of you.
You go to the hall to be devoured.
Yeah, you do. You do. Right. And yet, what do you do when you come into the center of God's city? There's the altar and there's the sacrament, and him feeding himself to you. That's the difference. You're not being consumed, you're consuming. So it does alleviate the pressure of that cross. It does make it easy because you're being preached to. God sends you a preacher to say, today you will be with me in paradise.
Yeah, so that's the other aspect of it that's I know is missing in most people's understanding is they don't think externally. So so that's the things spiritual are entirely internal, and you're like, no.
Yeah.
That's what people think.
They're not. But they're not embodied outside.
The spiritual things are things of the mind or of the heart.
Yeah, the feelings,
but not the body, and certainly not the body of Christ, not the Christian community.
Right.
Which is very strange because, like you said, well, your neighbor is Christ to you, or we were saying earlier.
Yes.
Or if you don't see Christ in your neighbor, then you won't see him in the cup. That's it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Or good stuff.
Yeah. So we'll stop there. We're going long.
We better
stop. Conversation on for hours. So thank you for listening in pieces or all at once, you maniacs. Thank you again to everyone who listens and supports us, and thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation. I hope it's beneficial. Go pick up volume 19 of Luther's works on Jonah and Habakkuk. Have fun with that. Borncom on the Old Testament, Luther on the Old Testament. And we'll come back next week and do some more with Habakkuk, and then probably dive into some really Eastern Fathers, maybe some Desert Fathers even. We'll see how it goes. But thanks, everybody.
Yeah. Peace.
God bless you. There we go.
Okay. Done recording.
Cool.
You guys rock.
Thank you. We are rock stars. Old, decrepit, washed up rock stars.
I do not get all the Mick Jagger treatments. I did not know about the blood. I should have guessed.
No. Yes.
Because I was watching it like, this is absurd. I cannot believe he can do this. And no, he can't. He can.
If you had the amount of money and contacts that he has, you could. That's the difference.
Well, and the amount of money and context that he gets because he can.
Yeah. What's weird too, though, is they say, well, we have to tour because only me and Keith wrote the song, so we're the only one who gets royalties, right? So we have to stay on tour so the other guys can make money. Like, you've been on tour for like 1,000 years. How much money do they need? Like, maybe scale back.
Their first album came out. They were all teenagers, right? Young teens.
Yes.
They were in their 13, 16. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're talking about 65 years or something of touring.
The things they've seen.
The things they've seen.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Well, it's like I said, I saw a picture of Nancy Pelosi. She was 20 years old, and she's standing there shaking John F. Kennedy's hand at the White House. And you're like, oh, the things that she's done in those years, the things that she's
in one sense, nothing
to get to where she's at.
In one sense, I mean, what do you have to show? You've been in Congress, and now you're saying you're going to fix it, and you've been there this long, and you've not done it already, right? I mean,
no, you know what I'm talking about, though.
I do know what you're
There's
talking about.
There's a reason these old ladies now are all of a sudden really angry at men and getting their revenge. It's like the things that you've had to do to get to where you're at. Again, I watched Kamala Harris talk the other day.
And I just turned the casting couch, right? Yeah.
I just said the things that this woman must be good at to become the vice president of the United States must boggle the mind, because she is incapable of coherent thought. So she must be great at something. I'm just saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'd say the same thing about men too, not to be a full misogynist, but whatever those men are doing, same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that was
like
what
John McCain 2.0. Whatever John McCain 2.0 did to become a senator,
Did you? It was like Mike Johnson, who's the Speaker, right, of the House, and he's
Yeah.
like, "Well, when I was just a junior Congressperson, I saw all the abuses of this
Right.
FISA system, right? But then,
Right.
they just took me into this SCIF, and I saw they showed me classified. We can't change this law. It has to stay the same." I'm like,
Right.
what do they have on you now?
Exactly. What quote unquote classified pictures did you see, Mike?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I suspect. Because otherwise, because you've just flipped. They just
Yeah.
turned you, and it wasn't like,
Yeah.
we stopped all these terrorist threats. I mean, maybe, but probably not. This is what
If
we
you
can
create
do
the
to
problem
you.
that you're trying to fix,
Yeah.
it's like we said, the maker of the maker. It's like you created the problem, and now you're telling us that you got to fix the problem. I read Hegel. I know how this turns out.
Well, it's all thing like, we're gonna rein in the fiscal spending, and you're like,
Sure.
but you didn't.
Right.
You haven't.
Right.
Why do we keep believing
Well,
you when you say that?
On the simplest level, I was explaining this the other day again, is when you raise minimum wage, you drive small businesses out of business so that these
And you raise the
corporations
cost of
can then-
goods. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then all the other giant corporations that actually own the politicians who raise the minimum wage benefit. And the reason that they raise the minimum wage then is so that these corporations that own them can gobble up the whole market. So the reason they're raising minimum wage has nothing to do with you. It has to do with the corporations.
Mm-hmm.
And by you arguing that you need to be paid more, you are the problem. But you think you're fixing the problem. And that's what they want you to believe.
This is why I stopped paying dues and going to the Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah.
When I learned what they did with the borders, that they're the ones that funded the open borders in part.
Yes. Right.
It's like your dollars trickle up. It's this whole scheme. It's a pyramid scheme.
Yeah.
You're like, seriously? I mean, I thought it was just we were helping each other and we were being good neighbors.
Right.
No, you're actually just funding human trafficking. And you're like,
Right.
what? Well, because we want cheap labor. Oh,
Right.
well, I suppose you are the Chamber of
Pyramid
Commerce.
schemes are such a perfect symbol of a perverted hierarchy, right? It's like such a perfect, literally a perfect model of a hierarchy gone completely haywire. Because you're like, we'll have open borders and human trafficking and all the things that the Bible holds up as like in virtuous. We'll just flip those on their head and turn them into evil things. But you're doing good. Don't you
Well,
want to do
like
good? You're
like Johnson said, if we don't have
Yes.
this FISA warrant system, we won't be able to control the fentanyl trade. And you're like, wait a minute, the fentanyl trade you're not controlling with the FISA warrants now?
the fentanyl trade that you handed over to China by your emergency withdrawal from Afghanistan that you have been planning for years. That?
What am I missing here?
The same
you're just
people
giving
are-
us news bites to throw out on that thing, and then
Exactly.
and then just like little dogs, we just lap it up and say, "Oh, that was so nice. Thank you for the treat. I feel better now."
Scraps from the master's table. Yes.
Or we could just ignore it all until it comes to our doorstep, I
Yeah.
suppose. Then you have to deal with it.
Right.
But-
It's like somebody said the other day to me. I go, I need help. I'm struggling financially. Why are we sending our money over to Ukraine or Israel? And they're like, yeah, but you're not suffering the way they are. I'm like, how do you know? How do you know I'm not? I actually have a friend right now who's she moved to Israel, and she is not suffering. She is not. She's having the best time of her life.
She's not in
probably
Gaza,
coming home.
though.
Exactly my point.
Right.
That's happening over the high rises on the other side of the river. You can't see it.
Isn't that
Well, and
incredible?
so you're like, oh, here's me at a coffee shop. Here's me at this vegan restaurant, and I'm having, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, here's me at the Wailing Wall. I'm like, cool. But where's all the savagery and stuff? It's like, oh, that's over there. We don't have to see it.
It was just like it's always been striking to me with Dominican Republic and Haiti, right?
Yes. Oh,
You're like,
well, that coup. Yeah.
The only thing that distinguishes this is a border.
Yeah.
And you've
Right.
got like a completely different, not only they say
Totally
it's
different,
cultural,
right.
but like economic situation and human suffering.
Right.
and-
Was that before or after Europe destroyed the culture that was there?
Yeah.
But that's a great example. Like they admitted they're staging a coup in Haiti right now. The U.S. government admitted it, and no one knows there's a coup happening in Haiti because no one cares.
Well, and they're setting up
Which tells
Maidan
you there's
too for Ukraine.
There's a Key and Peele skit, right, where they're African leaders, and they're talking to a guy from the U.S. Department of State, and they're like, we need help. Our people are starving. They're like, yeah, no, we're with you in spirit. Intellectually, we're your allies. We got. And then he looks at the other guy, and the other guy gives him the head nod. He goes, And who is going to defend all of our rich natural mineral resources and oil? And he just pulls out his phone and goes, call in the airstrikes. And these helicopters like fly out of nowhere. And it's like, yeah, that's how we operate. And so you're gonna invest your faith in that? Really? I think the flaw in the system has been exposed. It's over, right? This is why the TikTok stuff is happening, so they can try and control the internet and get a handle on all this misinformation. It's like,
you think if we, but I don't know. I don't know if we'll do.
This is what happens when 70-year-old people don't understand something. Well, we'll just pass a whole bunch of laws that control the internet. Like, that is, that's not how this works, right? I mean, you've done a pretty good job of deleting the internet that I knew in 1999.
That's what I'm saying. China's done a pretty good job.
Yeah.
Although, remember, they banned Bitcoin mining back, it was 3 years ago now.
Yeah.
And now there's double the amount of Bitcoin miners in China that there were then.
Yes.
You're like, wait a minute, but it's banned. And now there's twice as many?
There's laws, man. There's laws.
There's laws. Yeah. Good luck trying to govern that much land and that many people with one government. Yeah.
Right. That's the problem. And so it's there is no solution other than an absolute collapse. And then that's not a solution. It's just a collapse. It's just like a little reprieve of suffering.
That's
before somebody comes in and goes, we'll set up a new system that's just as bad, if not worse, than the old system. Again, go look at the French Revolution. Monarchy, bureaucracy. Monarchy, back and forth, back and forth. Right. And you're like, well, neither one of these works. It's like, well, we have tribalism. We could go back to warlords. Like, I don't think so. We tried that with Napoleon.
There's probably some kind of version of localism is,
I mean, if you are one of the Mongols, I'm sure it's a pretty good system, Yeah. But if you're in their way, I don't know. Seems kind of rough. I like the Greek system. You want to come and join us or die? Oh, sure. Love to join. What do I do?
Yeah, but the Greek system worked. It was city-state until Alexander, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And then it all went to hell after Alexander.
I mean, in Minnesota, we're basically city-states now. We're so disconnected from.
Yeah, I think you might be surprised in the fall what happens in Minnesota.
Well, you saw they voted on building a completely Muslim city in northern Minnesota.
Did they?
It's called a mosque center or something, mosque community. Yeah, they're going to build an entire community of Muslims with a mosque at the center of the community. It's going to be an entirely Islamic community.
Christians used to do this. Too bad we don't anymore.
Yeah, I know. Well, as I said, I don't care. Well, again, we're pre-Christians, so I should live next to my Muslim neighbors. I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, unless they want to kill you,
because they're super conservative too, by the way. It's going to be 3 or 4 generations before their kids bail. But so far, the new guys, they're super. They're not down with DEI, much to the chagrin of Minnesota's.
That's what I'm saying. I think it may backfire on them, and Minnesota may be a little bit different.
Well, I always tell people this: the people,
especially if they're not Somali, right? I mean, the Somalis are different, obviously. Not to speak.
Well, most of the people here are Somalis. That's a part of it.
But not all the Somalis are the same either, and why they're here.
No, but as I tell people, the Somalis don't like you as much as you don't like them. So maybe instead of both of you being bigoted, you should just talk to each other and realize neither one of us like what the school board is doing. Maybe we have more in common than we thought.
Yeah,
but we don't think that way.
Places. That's happened in some places.
Well, we don't think that way though. It's like they're different, and they're the stranger, they're the other. And they don't like us. They're bigoted. They don't want to change. I'm like, neither did your grandfather. Yet here we are, right? And so you can either be their enemy for 3 or 4 generations and things just increase as far as the violence go, or you can befriend them and talk to them and treat them like neighbors because they don't want to give up.
What else can you do, actually? I mean,
right. I always remind them, you do belong to a church body that tried to secede from the nation on numerous occasions. Right?
Yes. Yes.
The LCMS had whole cities devoted to not speaking English. And then we had that little dust up with Germany in 1941 that changed things. But if there was no World War II, I'm pretty sure the LCMS would still be doing services in German.
Yeah, maybe.
Because that immigrant church mentality was strong, just as with the Italians, the Irish, and others. Then when the Koreans and the Hmong came over, it was the same. It's the same now with the Somalis and the United Arab Emirates. Yeah. Right? It's generational. We have Tibetans in Minnesota. We have a huge Tibetan population.
Interesting.
And I'm just like, it's fine. Just it'll work itself out if you let.
I will say this: our Hispanic ministry that we support in Sheboygan has been seeing exponential growth as of late of Venezuelans and Colombians. Yeah.
Weird.
Weird.
Wonder where are they coming from?
Why are they here? Why did they come here?
Right.
Like, well, they don't have, their kids aren't baptized. They're not going to church. Now they are. So
there you go. Exactly.
You know, be good neighbors to them.
Whose city are they actually? Like, what's?
Maybe Augustine's City of God is a thing to study again too. You know?
Oh, I think so for sure. Yeah, especially now with the whole, because again, everybody's like, well, who are you voting for and whose side? I'm like,
that's the City of Man stuff. Yeah, City of Man stuff.
That's City of Man stuff, exactly.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, now that we're building actual temples and
it's temporary comfort. It's temporary comfort.
Yep.
That's what
always.
Yeah.
Because you're not asking the higher question of meaning. You're not asking like, what is God trying to teach us by bringing these people into our community? Like, he's trying to teach us something. It might be as simple as just love your neighbors yourself, or it may be as simple as maybe give them Jesus. You know, it's like, it's hard to give people Jesus when you're discriminating against them.
Well, there's Jonah, right? There's Jonah.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
God forbid you preach to them and they actually repent, and then the earthly city becomes a heavenly city, right? I mean, that's Nineveh become a city of God. How's that? That can't happen.
Maybe I'll do that.
It did.
I've got a number of people that live near Somalis, and they're just like, oh, you just can't talk to them and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I'm going to do that. Jonah and the Somalis. I'll do that.
Ooh. Jonah.
Yeah. They hate when I do that. They hate when I get too specific. They're like, oh, okay, Pastor, that's the stretch. I'm like, is it though? Let's break it down.
Yeah. Well, they'll say, well, God didn't send us there. You're like, he didn't, did he? Huh. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
All right. I don't know.
Until he does. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is what it is.
Nice.
All right, everybody. Thanks again on the live stream. Thanks for hanging with us. Get a life, people. Like, go to work. Go eat. What are you doing? Don't hang out with us. Bunch of rapscallions. All right. Love you. God bless you. Bye.